Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here, joined by Ed Lecore, talking some shop to start off with here, and we'll see how things develop. But you were talking about one of Nadia's hangouts, and some hairy stuff happens in them, the communist anarchist hangout.
Yes, I mean, I spent a lot of time last night explaining why anarcho-communism is a contradiction in terms, but I really wanted to talk about the public education issue, because we got into a long session, particularly with the Italian, and my issue is that public education is problematic because it's government controlled, it's a monopoly, it's centralized, it's extremely inefficient. And then when you look at private education, you have variety, you have competition, you have the accountability of competition, you have the quality improvement of competition, you have the price lowering of competition, you have all-round improvement of competition. So you've got public education, which, if you look at America, public education is extremely bloated. You've got public sector unions, which are incredibly corrupt, which are anti-meritocracy as far as the teachers are concerned, and their priority is the cushy positions of the teachers, not the well-being of the students. So, and the public education unions have known to be a massive problem for years and years and years. They're incredibly corrupt. And so you've got the public sector, large public sector schools, which are disaster for a lot of minorities in particular. A lot of black families are desperate to get their kids into charter schools or to get into some sort of token system. And then you've got the private sector, which is superior in every way. Even when they're teaching stuff that's garbage, the market basically takes care of that problem. Because if you're teaching kids stuff that is useless for mathematics or engineering or anything else like that, they're not going to get jobs in those areas, and the problem solves itself. Now, the Italian's objection to this was that in his country, they have a mixture where they have the public sector that takes a lot of cues from the private sector. And so he was saying that this is a straw man because I was addressing, I was making generalization and we were talking about the public sector in America. And he's saying, no, there's the Italian version, there's the Italian version, there's the Italian version. And as I say, I don't know what the Italians do, but I suspect he's obviously cherry picking. And the reason why is because this is a pattern of behavior. This is to do with the mixed systems. Whenever you have a mixture of public and private sector, well, let's look at the extremes. When you have a pure government control of pretty much anything, when you have a total government monopoly of education or whatever the institution is, it's a mess. Particularly if you have like a Soviet Union or China during the Mao era or the Khmer Rouge or whatever. So when you have a pure state control, it is atrophy, economic decay. It's an absolute catastrophe, which is why not even the most brainwashed socialist and Marxist can point to any successes in pure socialism and Marxism, applied without any compromise. They don't even try to cite those things. On the contrary, what do? They come up with excuses for why, Maoism doesn't count, and Stalinism doesn't count, and Bolshevism doesn't count, and the Khmer Rouge doesn't count, etc., etc., etc. So on one hand, you have pure socialism and Marxism that's no socialists and Marxists argue, basically even tried to defend, because it's just that catastrophically disastrous. And on the other hand, we have laissez-faire capitalism. We have free market, which not only can we point to examples like Shanghai and Hong Kong, where they have a limited government, rule of law, because it's based on the British colony model, and economic success beyond belief. But also you've got the 19th century, you've got other examples of this. So we've got contemporary examples, historical examples, and we've got the fact that the extent to which free markets are applied, that's the extent to which you have economic prosperity. So you've got decades of no free markets in China, and total economic stagnation and mass starvations and mass poverty. Then you had the free market slowly ramp up, because even communists admit the free market works now. And the economic success in China and India has resulted in a higher number of people leaving poverty, about 500 million, than has ever existed in all of recorded history. So it's like the greatest economic success in history, and the left completely ignore it. This is just within the last 15 years. So on the one hand, you've got pure public control, which is always a disaster, and pure private control, or at least any degree of private control, which is always a success. And their solution is to mix the two. And that's the problem I have here, because I don't just, it doesn't, his argument was that it works. Firstly, as I say, how do you know that it wouldn't be even better if it pure private? Because that's the problem here. You acknowledge that the public sector needs the private sector as an example in order to keep prices low or quality high, or to benefit from a multi-independent experiment model. And I've made this point over and over again, that you need multiple independent simultaneous experiments so that the mistakes are isolated and the successes are emulated, replicated. This is the marketplace of ideas. This is the independent model. Nobody can make a dent in that. It is self-evidently the best way to do things. And so even the public sector in the Italian model emulates that process. But the problem is, when it's a success, there's two problems here. One, they seem to attribute the success to the public sector, the part that, when left to its own devices in its purest form, is always a disaster. And two, it never occurs to them that if you're taking something which results in stagnation, the public sector, and something which results in exponential growth, private sector, and you're mixing the two together, that any success will be, let's say, half of the level of success you'd have if it was public sector. So they say, oh, well, this is the issue with the Scandinavian model. The Scandinavian model is, they have economic capitalism, but they have governmental socialism. They have high taxes, high spend. It's not socialism in the economic sense, and so many socialists will say it doesn't count. But it's the closest thing to a success the socialists and Marxists have got. So this is why Bernie Sanders constantly points to the Scandinavian countries. But what he's doing is he's pointing to a quasi-socialist system that isn't a total disaster, because all the pure socialist systems are disasters, and even he can't deny that. And so what he's doing is he's basically giving credit to the socialist element for the success, which can only be derived from the private element. Because, as I say, if you have pure private, it's a success, and your pure public is a disaster. So why would the public deserve any degree of credit for any result in a mixture? Why is the public sector successful when it's mixed with its opposite to the private sector? If it's not a success in any way, in its purest form.
Morality, they have a view of morality that's Platonic. They view morality as a perfect thing that's not attainable, and you simply try to imitate morality in some way. Morality is not practical. Morality is impractical in their view. So you have the moral system, which is government, which is not practical. And then you have the practical system, which is immoral. So it's a very, very messy world that they're in. But it comes from a Platonic view of morality. They think that morality is otherworldly, not this worldly, not practical.
Well, that would explain why the Italian socialist was arguing on purely pragmatic basis. He was arguing that if there's any degree of success, which, as I say, is debatable, because invariably these mixed systems are failures and successes in a sort of an ugly mixture, and that's why they have to cherry pick. I mean, look at the Scandinavian system. There are huge problems with Scandinavian countries, but there's also some successes, kind of, and so they cherry pick the successes. And all those failures are due to the fact that it's politically socialist. But the problem here is that he was arguing on a purely pragmatic basis. And when I objected on principle, when I objected on the basis that the public sector is a violation of individual rights, that it gives too much power to the government, etc., he basically just completely blew his lid. Because to him, we were arguing in a purely pragmatic realm. There was no room for principle there. And to him, my principles were just whims. Oh, that's just what you prefer. It's just your taste. To him, principle is just whim. It never occurs to him that one might actually have a pragmatic and results-based approach that is also based on principle. The reason why I favor the private sector over public is because of the results. So because that's what we do. We take the data, we take the sensory data, and then we use reason to integrate the sensory data, and from that we develop principles. So, I was taking the pragmatic approach in terms of looking at the data, and then I was developing principles from it. And he didn't understand that principles and pragmatism aren't at odds if you're coherent and rational.
We wouldn't always take a pragmatic approach. I mean, gun deaths in Britain are clearly lower than in America per capita because there aren't as many guns around.
Yeah.
So a pragmatic approach to reducing gun deaths would be to eliminate guns from society. Yet in America, we put up with gun deaths. So, so principle rules. Pragmatism does not.
Yeah, but I mean, you've got to be pragmatic, at least in the data gathering stage.
Oh,
But
okay.
yes, and because I'm talking to the big picture, yes, it would reduce gun deaths, but would it though? Because the resulting militias that would rise up, and this was actually brought up yesterday, would actually result in huge deaths.
Yeah, the wars.
It would be more people died of alcohol poisoning during the prohibition than beforehand, because people were drinking lots of illegal booze that was basically a mess. It wasn't governed by an open market or government regulation, and because it was a black market. And black market is still better than a heavily regulated or totally state-controlled society, because it still reflects some degree of real need and real free choices on the part of the public. This is why I supported the black market in Eastern Europe, for example, during the Cold War, because it was the closest thing to a real free market that they had in Poland at the time in particular. Because obviously anything official was controlled by the state and was therefore illegal, immoral, and abominable as far as I was concerned.
Your mic is getting really bumpy.
Okay, I'll reboot.
You want to reboot your presence? So Mr. Lecore and I have been working on trying to discuss doing some sort of a weekly get-together, shindig, or something like that. So what day of the week then would be interesting for you to think about doing our weekly shindig?
Oh, anything, because I could orientate my schedule around it pretty much.
And and any time we could choose?
Yeah, as long as it's not like 5 a.m, and which is what I've been doing lately, because that really messes you up.
So something like 5 p.m. to something like that would be reasonable. All right. I was thinking we should do a 2-hour show. The first hour talk, and then the second hour do comments and possibly other people get in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking. And then the first hour could be, it's got to be some current events.
Yes.
And then it's got to be some philosophy, because we can't just do it for current events, because that's too big of a crowd. There's too many people doing that already.
Yes, but very few people are analyzing current events in light of philosophies and principles. So a lot of it is ideological or like opinionated. So yes, there's definitely room for that sort of thing. As I say, an sort of objectivist news hour would be nice. It would be interesting. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a news channel, for example, that wasn't liberal like MSNBC or whatever the heck CNN are doing, or conservative like Fox? Well, if you call that conservative, it would be nice to know what an actual rational news channel would look like, because I honestly cannot picture it.
Yeah, it'd be weird. I mean, what? So we would obviously have to read the news stories that were being reported by the biased people, but then.
Yeah, well, I have an example. I have an example right now. I could do this right here, right now. Daily Mirror is super left-wing. It's so left-wing in my country that they call Nigel Farage the traitor. He's the guy that basically led the campaign to leave the EU. These people regard the severing of ties to a fascistic, anti-democratic foreign bureaucracy in favor of our political and legal sovereignty an act of betrayal. But betrayal to what exactly? Some sort of socialist, globalist utopia? I mean, it's if you're a traitor to your country, you can't call other people in your country traitors. That is ridiculous. But that gives you just some idea of the absurdity of the Mirror. But the specific issue was 2 days ago from this day. So it would have been, I think it would have been the 5th of September. Daily Mirror ran a headline article, front page, of a 14-year-old girl that shot and killed a giraffe on a safari. And the whole thing was, this is absolutely accessible land. It was a terrible, appalling thing. How could you do this? This is monstrous. And I remember thinking to myself that this is ideological. This is an ideological narrative. These are people who basically don't approve of hunting and are basically launching a moral crusade. But think about this. This was a 14-year-old girl who was now on the front page of the Daily Mirror being shamed and attacked in order to enforce an ideological narrative, this snobbery about anti-hunting. Because the same thing happened with fox hunting. Fox hunting is a cultural tradition that goes on in the countryside in the UK. It was until the liberal elites in the urban areas basically banned it because they don't understand anything that goes on in the country. And so you basically had this sort of moral disgust at something that they didn't really understand anything about. And it's the same thing with hunting. She's within her rights, particularly if it was a private safari, particularly because certain private safaris are funded by allowing hunters to basically keep the population down. I mean, we're apex predators, and if we kill all the apex predators, which we typically did, my country used to have bears in it and all sorts, we killed them all off centuries ago. If we kill the apex predators, it's our responsibility to keep the population down. It's that's how nature works. Nature isn't cuddly bunnies all the time. Nature is kill or be killed a lot of the time, and we need to. And if we don't approach nature with that mindset, we are doing it a terrible disservice, and we'll end up with massive overpopulation, which causes huge problems for everything. You know, they eat all the grass. They suffer all sorts of psychological and physical problems. And so you've got a lot of situations where hunting is perfectly fine. It is moral. It is the most reasonable way of dealing with the problem. It's often the most economical way because, as I say, private safaris are incredibly successful because they basically aren't government funded. I mean, a lot of these countries, in particularly in Africa, think they have much tax money to spend on safaris. Well, no, they don't. So the private sector solution is the best solution, and that means basically allowing people to hunt these animals at a certain limit. That's perfectly fine. But think about this. Think of the self-righteousness, the zealotry, the desire to pursue this ideological cause so much that the Daily Mirror, these filthy socialist bastards, are perfectly happy to destroy the life of a 14-year-old girl. It's news because she shot a giraffe. The villain of the day in the minds of millions of left-wing psychopaths because she did something they personally don't approve of, mainly because they don't know anything about it. It's like all those people that disapprove of certain types of guns, even though they don't know anything about guns. Stephen Crowder, did you see his? This is a point that he makes a lot. He did a sting, if you like, where he played a guy who wants to ban guns, and he had a table on a street with a load of guns, and he demonstrated that a lot of these people that are really against guns or for gun control don't know anything about guns, don't know anything about ammunition, are typically against guns that are like all black and have no wooden element to it. There's like it's sort of trigger aesthetic. It's like an aesthetic thing. It's nothing to do with magazine size or penetration rate or firing rate. It's nothing. It's not based on actual crime statistics because they want to ban the AR-15. Why? Because it looks scary. Shootings use handguns. They don't use the AR-15s. But that's the agenda. It's people criticizing, banning, and attacking things. And if you are an ignorant, self-righteous moron that doesn't know anything about a particular subject, that's fine. You want to have an opinion. You want to be a bigot. You want to be an ignoramus. But the response from authoritarians is always to ban things and to attack things and to destroy the lives of people who do things that they don't understand, that they don't care to understand. You think any of the people that took great glee in watching this 14-year-old girl's life be destroyed, do you think any of them understand hunting? Do you think anything have done any research on private reserves in Africa, for example? No, of course not. Same thing with a lot of the gun control people. They don't know anything about guns. They don't know anything about the paperwork required. They don't know that, because Stephen, again, this is why I like Crowder, because he's done a lot of exposés on this. He's demonstrated, for example, that gun fairs are not a loophole that you can just basically buy anything without a background check. He showed it over and over and over again. And the fact is that if you don't know anything about something, you shouldn't really not only have much of an opinion on it, because that's intellectual humility, but you shouldn't then insist on enforcing your beliefs or enforcing your tastes on everybody else through law, through government, through force, banning things, censoring things that you don't understand. Because what's the difference between that and, for example, in the 70s, when the Christian right in America tried to ban Dungeons and Dragons? There was a huge campaign. They really, because they were convinced it was devil worship. because they didn't understand anything about the fantasy genre, considering that you think they would understand fantasy, but there they go. And that's my point. I am sick of people who clearly, as a whole, as a culture, because the liberals don't have anything to do with gun culture, most of them anyway, and so they're criticizing a culture they have no interest in. It would be like me trying to ban football, for example. I have zero interest in sport. I have nothing to do with sport. The very idea of me banning sport just because I don't like it, just because every time I think of sport, I have nightmarish flashbacks to when I was at school, forced to stand in the middle of a cold, windy field in my shorts and a t-shirt. It was a nightmare for me. But the point is that I don't know anything about sport. I don't understand it. I don't like it. And so I don't comment on it. I don't have an opinion on it. I don't think I have a right to, let alone the right to ban things that I don't approve of. That level of arrogance is stunning, is truly, truly, truly contemptible. And I see it more and more and more and more from the left. They've become the Puritans, they have become the censors, they have become the authoritarians, they've become the Christian right. Yeah. And some of them actually realize that. Some of them that's what Sargon of Akkad is doing. He's a liberal, and Sam Harris to a certain degree is beginning to realize, yeah, the left are actually worse, because they actually, unlike the religious right, who are a joke, they actually succeed. Not talking like conservative Christians. In many respects, they're the sanest people in America, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about America. But I'm talking like the total nutcases. The nutcase Christians, they're a joke. They don't really get anything passed as law. They don't ban things. They don't censor things. But think of how many people's careers are regularly ruined as a result of SJWs and feminists, for example. They get people banned from Twitter. They get people defunded on Facebook. They basically are able to succeed in vilifying, delegitimizing, and censoring. The feminists have succeeded in getting games banned. You've had characters redesigned so that feminists don't complain about women showing too much cleavage or breast or whatever. And it's just they having a massive impact, a massive censorship impact. And they are what the religious right would be like if they were effective. And I think that it's only when I actually see that the left succeed in their authoritarianism and fascism and control and censorship and destroying people's careers and lives. It's only when I look at that I realize that the religious right, we had it good with them. I mean, we complain. I mean, not only atheists but also left-wingers as well. We spent because I spent a long time with the atheist and skeptical communities, particularly in I had a lot of kinship with the American and Skeptical Society, James Randi and things like that. And we spent most of our time bashing the religious right, the Christian right in America. We spent all of our time bashing them over and over and over again. But now that I know what real fascism looks like, real tyranny, when it actually knows what it's doing, when it's effective, when it has the media on its side, when it has academia on its side, when it has pop culture on its side, wow, I'd go back to just having to worry about the religious right any day of the week. At this point, they're not even on my radar, which is why I think it's largely a waste of time trolling them.
Well, if they're the only ones that are willing to fight the Muslims and they win, then they're going to be in charge when they beat the Muslims.
Well, are they though? Because they're not going to be the only ones. They're the only ones. You see, Christian conservatives, some of them anyway, I mean, are extremely good at dealing with Islam because they understand concepts, they understand moral absolutes, and they understand doctrinal and scriptural foundational principles. They understand religion in terms of its core tenets, which is the only coherent way you can understand it. The left don't understand religion in terms of core principles because they're not religious. Let's face it, they're all culturally Christian at most, secular humanist explicitly a lot of the time as well. And so they can't, that's why they keep thinking that you can just equate Islam with Christianity, that they're an equivalent, because they don't understand the profound foundational distinction.
Well, if the Christians take over in order to fight Islam and beat Islam, and the Christians are in power at the end of this, they might do certain things like not be very nice to gays.
Yes, but they are actually kind of boxed into a corner as far as some of their arguments. For example, I've heard a lot of Christian conservatives argue for the separation of church and state because it's separation of mosque and state. I've had a lot of Christian conservatives criticize Saudi Arabia, criticize Muslim countries because they're theocratic, because they don't believe in separation of mosque and state. And so in order to be consistent to that criticism, they'd have to acknowledge that you need that kind of thing in the West as well. I mean, they can only, they're not going to, yes, some of them are going to argue against Islamic theocracy while promoting a Christian theocracy because they're hypocrites, because they're inconsistent, because they're power hungry. But at the same time, there are those Christians that have enough intellectual integrity to recognize that you can't argue against Islamic theocracy and have anything like that on your own side. That is just horrifically immoral and intellectually incoherent. So I do think that I mean, in Europe, for example, this is what's happening. You've got like groups like Pegida, you've got various right-wing groups which are trying to fight against the Islamification of the West, particularly Europe, and they are Christian. There is a sort of Christian revival that's going on. But the thing is, it's European Christianity. It's not like American Christianity. So in that case, it doesn't really bother me because these are Christians. These people aren't going to be screaming Allah Akbar and blowing themselves up. These people aren't going to be starting patrols, beating up gays in the streets. They're not that bad. Even in America, they're not really that bad. And it doesn't bother me because if they do rise up, take advantage of the fight against Islam and defeat them, I'm perfectly happy with that. And I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'd love to be able to go back to challenging Christianity, but right now they aren't even remotely as big a problem as I used to think they were, because I didn't have a sense of perspective. I had a blind spot towards the left. For years and years and years, I was an independent that had left-wing leanings. And then I started looking at Islam, and then I started looking at the left's response to Islam, and that's when the whole thing collapsed.
Right, but, well, I mean, you're saying you're getting a little too excited about the Christians. They're really not that good of people. They're really bad people.
This is the problem. The true fundamentalists are, but there is a sizable proportion of Christian conservatives that are actually okay, that actually do subscribe to constitutional principles, that do believe in religious liberty, and that's the key point here, religious liberty. Because if the worst they do is like preach in the street, or knock on the door, like Jehovah's Witnesses, that's the worst I have to deal with. I don't have a problem with that.
The worst thing they do is they believe in a sky god.
Yeah, but that's not worse. That's not worse. There are worse things. Because look at it this way: Christians don't necessarily believe in destroying your individual rights and freedoms. They don't necessarily believe that. They don't have to necessarily believe that. But then,
why do Muslims have to necessarily believe it?
Because their ideology is political, military, and legal, and the religious element is actually the fourth and least important. That's just the glue that holds the primary three components together. Islam has always been political, it has always been military, and it's always been legal. And it's very difficult to extract those elements from it. This is why you have Muslims that don't even recognize the legitimacy of Muslim countries, because Islam is their politics. And I mean Islam in a global sense, in an imperialistic sense, in a centralized sense. They want a caliphate. Because in the same way that, imagine if you abolished papacy, Catholics would only be able to think in terms of a legitimate authority that's a papacy. Even if you had decades, because the caliphate, the last caliphate, the Ottoman caliphate was abolished in
your microphone is breaking up so bad I was trying to make it through, but I can't quite understand there we go. So yeah, I think Ed is judging the Islam by its worst and Christianity by its best elements. And if Christianity were to get into power, I don't think its best elements would remain its dominant elements the way it is right now. We've seen Christianity in power in the past. And Islam, if it gets into power, we know exactly how it behaves. But when it's not in power, look at the way Muslims in the United States behave. A lot of them have 9-to-5 jobs and so on. So Muslims in a secular society can behave themselves, and Christians can behave rather badly. We all know about that. I was saying I think that you're judging Islam by its worst practitioners, and you're judging Christianity by its best practitioners.
No, I'm judging them by their core tenets. I'm making a qualitative assessment between the two. I'm not looking at necessarily in terms of like demographics. The left want to look at it in terms of the nice number of Muslims or that sort of thing, but that doesn't tell you anything about the ideology as itself. You can't determine anything about Nazism just by having a casual conversation with some random Germans in the street in 1929, can you? No,
Right.
You have to study Mein Kampf. You have to study the actual ideology. And so if you look at Christianity and look at Islam, in terms of their fundamental scriptural and doctrinal and institutional principles, they're night and day, because the fundamental difference, I don't know whether you were here when I explained this difference, it's all about the timing. When Christianity developed, it developed as a fringe cult in the urban areas of the Roman Empire. It was an urban movement. And this is why the term pagan, for example, was basically derived from the Roman term for bumpkin, because it was the pagans in the countryside that were the last to convert in the Roman Empire. And you basically have the Roman Empire gradually become more and more Christianized until Constantine, when it became official, became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And with Constantine became a political force and a military force, and it had an influence on Roman law. So that's when you had something that was equivalent to Islam. But that was centuries after the scripture and doctrine was established. By the time the New Testament was finished, by the time the last epistle was finished, you were still at least 150 years away from Constantine. And so there are no explicit political, military, and legal principles, institutional principles in the New Testament. There are none. The Old Testament has that because it was written at a time where there was an actual Jewish government, a Jewish legal system, etc. So that's why the Old Testament is similar to the Quran. That's why people who want to make false equivalencies say, well, the Old Testament's like the Quran. But that's irrelevant. The New Testament is what Christians use to interpret and sort of cherry pick from the Old Testament. It's their primary lens by which they observe the Old Testament. And the New Testament was written at a time when the Christianity had not yet established political, military, and legal institutions. Islam, on the other hand, by the time the Quran was finished, there was an Islamic caliphate under Abu Bakr. There was, in fact, it was probably the Quran was finished after Abu Bakr. So there've been several generations of a political, theocratic, centralized authority. They'd had military conquests. They'd already ethnically cleansed Arabia. They'd already conquered significant chunks of Middle East and North Africa. So they had a military, political, and Sharia law had already been established as well in Muhammad's own lifetime. So that's the difference. You had an official, governmental, political, institutional reality set up before the Quran was even finished. Same with the law, same with the military practices. That is a huge difference. And that is why whenever you look at Christian history, when you look at Christian governments, Christian military, and Christian laws, they are hugely divergent from each other. Because we've had all these different countries, Christian countries, throughout history, everything from Norway to America, if you like. And they've got different legal systems, different political systems, and different military policies. Because there's nothing explicit in Christianity regarding those things. There's no blueprint for military practice. Whereas the entire 8th and 9th chapters of the Quran are all about military practice. And so it's a lot harder to have a military practice that isn't imperialistic in Islam than it is in Christianity.
Islam includes a political order.
Yeah, it includes a military policy of expansionism. It is intrinsically imperialistic and intrinsically expansionist because it was already a centralized imperialistic expansionist military political force by the time the Quran was finished.
Right.
The Quran was probably finished a lot later than a lot of people realize. And so in terms of the fundamentals, because the doctrines are derived from scripture, and to a certain extent it's the other way around in the early stages. And so when you're looking at the fundamentals, when I look at Christian history, for example, I don't blame Christianity for every bad Christian government. I don't blame Christianity for every bad legal system, like the Inquisition necessarily, or the trial of the Templars, which is one of the worst legal miscarriages of justice in human history. Terrible. Poor sods. No, the reason why I don't is because I know that you can't derive necessarily these exact political principles or these exact legal principles or military principles from Christianity. A lot of the political, legal, and military policies of Christian countries in the medieval period or Renaissance was a product of its time. Whereas if you look at Islam, it's out of time. They try to make out that the the Islamic atrocities and terrorism and all the rest of it is because of the West. They're trying to blame the persecution of women in Muslim countries on Western colonialism. That's how demented the left are. It's not a product of its time. That's the whole point. It's a product of the 7th century.
So the
Christians, because look at Christians, for example. Christians, when they talk about their ideal community, what are they based it on? They base it on the apostolic church. They imagine Jesus.
The New Testament was written inside the Roman Empire.
Yes, but it was written by fringe cultists. It wasn't written by anybody. It wasn't written by anybody who had any political, military, or legal power.
It was written under the influence of Pax Romana, the Roman.
Yes, yeah, it was part of the Greco-Roman civilized world.
So it didn't have politics as part of its main concern, because politics was so stable it wasn't even on the radar. Is that? It seems to me that's the reason why the New Testament doesn't deal with politics. Politics was very stable. It was a background issue.
Yeah, well, specifically is because a lot of the New Testament was written during the Flavian dynasty. And the Flavians were authoritarians obsessed with censorship. And so a lot of people had to dance around. This is why if you read Pliny, if you read Suetonius, if you read Tacitus, they were very, very, very politically delicate. They were walking around eggshells around the government. They had to, because censorship was very high. This is why we still have Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny, and Josephus, the big four of the Flavian dynasty, because those were the ones that played ball with the government the most. And that's why the New Testament is almost entirely expunged of explicit political politics, particularly Roman politics.
Yeah, politics being in the background doesn't take part in the New Testament. Politics is very important in Islam. Yeah. It's an integral part of Islam.
Because Muhammad was a leader. He was a political leader and a military leader.
So Christianity's more concerned with morality primarily. Islam includes morality, but it also has politics.
Yes, because Jesus is not depicted as being a political leader.
Right.
He is not depicted as taking the throne. That's what people expect. In fact, they deliberately, in the New Testament, they deliberately go out of their way as much as possible to say that Jesus was apolitical. My kingdom is not of this earth. He deliberately distances himself from political figures, and he deliberately distances himself from the idea that the Jews had at that time, that the Messiah was supposed to be a political leader, an actual explicit king, a secular man.
He had to do that, or he would have been killed.
Yes. Yes, the writers had to have him do that, or they would be killed.
Right.
And the later scribes were under greater pressure in the Flavian dynasty than they would have been earlier on.
So of necessity, Christianity is a moral system more than a political system.
Yes, because it's basically the circumstances of its origins.
Right.
And that makes a huge difference, because Christianity has allowed for the greater, because if you think about the last 1,500 years, you've had more diverse ideas in politics and law. Think of all the legal systems.
Communism is nothing but Christianity.
Well, no, because communism is an explicit economic and political system that doesn't leave room for choice.
No, it's a moral system imposed on politics. It has nothing imposed on economics.
Because Marx explicitly thought of his work as economic science.
Well,
it had a moral assumption.
Now, you have to admit that there's nothing about economic science that comes anywhere near the theory of communism.
Yeah, there's
it just
nothing.
take part of.
He was wrong. I mean,
right.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's not a theory of economic science. It is a moral theory.
Yes, but they think it is an economic science, and Marx himself sold this.
They take altruism as a moral principle, and they deduce economics from that.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
So it's a moral system.
Yeah. But like Islam, communism is explicitly political and military, and at least political and economic, and the military follows on from that. Whereas with Christianity, it's not. You can take the moral principle and try to impose it, but even the Pilgrim settlers of America, for example, who tried to emulate the Apostolic Church's communal model, realized it was a mistake. They were on record as saying, John Smith, who the Pocahontas guy, was on record as saying that we thought we knew better than God when we tried communism. That's what he actually said. Right. So they were basically, they experimented with economic ideas and all sorts of ideas, and they tried to extrapolate it from the Bible, and often it would go horribly wrong.
I think, just to make sure you didn't miss the point,
Yeah.
Christianity is a moral system which does not preclude it developing an economic system or a political system, which communism is.
Yeah. Yes,
So
but
don't
it is
get
not
too
explicit.
excited about the fact that Islam has a political side and Christianity fails to have a political side. That's not really a cogent.
Well, no, because think of the level, as I say, look at it purely in terms of history. Think of the sheer diversity of political, economic, and legal systems that have been developed throughout Christian history. I mean, look at all the different, because there was a huge number of Christian countries in Europe and in North Africa, and they even developed some really innovative political systems in the Crusader kingdoms, like incredibly innovative. And even the Scandinavians, when the Vikings converted to Christianity, they experimented with all sorts of interesting systems. Iceland developed the first parliament. I think that was when they were Christian. But the point is that if Christianity didn't allow for a tremendous amount of variety, if it was something in it that was bound to lead to something like communism, then we would have had a lot more communism, and we haven't had that. We didn't really have communism until Marx. We had variations, and as I say, Christians did experiment with that, but when it didn't work, they abandoned it. That's the point here. If pilgrim settlers in the 17th century? I think it was 17th century.
Started in 1624.
Yeah. If pilgrim settlers, Christian Puritan pilgrim settlers that were so fundamentalist that my country kicked them out, after all, if they could see what was wrong with communism, then it's pretty clear that there's nothing binding to that kind of system within Christianity. They are capable of learning. They are capable of adapting. They are because there are fundamental principles in Christianity that contradict in certain versions of Christianity that contradict Marxism. Marxism, for example, a lot of Marxists and socialists deny the mind. They deny the ability to be rational. They deny free will explicitly. A lot of them are materialistic determinists. Christians aren't materialistic determinists. Some of them are theological determinists, like the Calvinists, but many Christians really heavily emphasize free will, personal responsibility, and choice. They may not do so for the right reasons, but they do emphasize that. You've got to give them credit for that. That's one of the reasons why many Christians opposed communism, because they saw it as an infringement upon people's choices, because they may believe it for theological reasons, because they believe that you have to choose to be saved. They believe you have to choose to be moral.
There are Muslims who emphasize hard studying and being honest and working hard, and that does not recommend Muslims to me.
No, because there's also a principle in Islam that says that they should not be honest, that they should lie. That's the problem. And there's also a huge amount of culture in Islam that is incredibly willfully ignorant. I saw a stat where it basically said that more books have been translated, scientific and academic books have been translated into Spanish in the last year than have been translated into Arabic for the last century. That tells you of a huge academic and intellectual black hole that has developed in their society. The level of intellectual curiosity and development is stunningly low. And it's been that low since they rejected Aristotle.
And virtues are part of a context. Virtues aren't just floating. So these Christian virtues that you keep seeing, I'm just not impressed. I think these Christians are scumbags. And I think they're one tiny step better scumbag than the Muslims. A teeny tiny step better.
Well, I mean, I would recommend you look at Steve Crowder's work. I recommend you look at what they're doing, what Dennis Prager's been doing. I recommend you look at
Steve Crowder and Milo Yiannopoulos will not discuss God.
Well, yeah, well, Milo will. He loves taking cheap pot shots at atheists.
Yeah, but that's all. He won't discuss the subject.
No, and because they know that it's a quicksand. They're not stupid. And the point is that these people do have a form of integrity. They're disintegrated in some respects, and they're misintegrated in other respects, but there is a degree to which that they are integrated. Because I don't think that because going with the dim hypothesis, I don't think you can classify people as just D, I, or M. I think that most people are a mixture of the three, and it's a degree of emphasis depending on the subject, depending on the mood, depending on their age and things like that. I think that and there is a portion of the Christian mindset that is integrated correctly, I think, and it is in their understanding of personal responsibility, free will, and there are many Christian individualists that many Christian conservatives are individualists, period. And this has been goes back to at least John Locke. And so John Locke didn't argue for individualism for the right reasons. He had terrible reasons, but at least he argued for it. And that's my point. They may be not very well integrated at times, but at least there's something there. There's infinite hope there. Whereas because Christianity doesn't necessarily, inevitably, and logically lead to tyranny. Because, as I say, they emphasize free will choice. Whereas socialism has to, because it is a system of control, economic control, political control. They think when they talk about anarcho-communism, it's a joke because you can't make everybody do something without control. You can't have homogeneous anarchy. That is a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, the values in Christianity that are valuable, this core of actual values, I think probably all come from its roots in Greek philosophy and individualism. Yes. Greeks emphasize the individual, and in Christianity it's all about the individual. The individual has a value. Jesus values every individual, and God saves every individual who prays to him, and it's all about your soul and your importance and you as a single entity. That's very important.
Let's look, because Christianity innovated individual salvation rather than collective salvation. Up until Christianity, this is where the scapegoat idea comes from. The scapegoat idea was that you literally put the sins of the tribe, the entire tribe, not an individual, the entire tribe onto a goat, and then you either kill the goat or let it free. And that was the scapegoating ceremony. And Christianity is developed from that. But Jesus died for you, not for the tribe. And that's the distinction. And it's a bizarre way of getting individualism, but the point is they got there. But let's take a step back. Let's look at the big picture here. Let's really look at the big picture. Let's look at the fundamentals, the real true principles that matter to us. This isn't about Christianity. This isn't even about Islam. This is about Aristotle versus Plato. That's what's really going on here. And everything else is just part of that. Because both Christianity and Islam historically have toyed with and built economic and political and intellectual principles on both. And if you look at the period of Islamic history, I think there was a Ayn Rand Institute lecture on this. I could have got it from them. I can't remember where I got it from. But they specifically pinpointed the exact moment when the Islamic civilization destroyed itself. And that was when they rejected Aristotle. There was I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a major theologian and academic figure in the Islamic world. And he explicitly rejected all of Aristotle. And the point is that's happened with Christianity, but they've also embraced Aristotle. That Christianity alternates between Plato and Aristotle, and that's when they go either right or wrong. It's not about Christianity. Christianity is a leaf in a stream, and sometimes it's going down, going in the right direction, sometimes it's going in the wrong direction, but it's been pulled along by something far greater. Plato is greater than Jesus. Aristotle is greater than Jesus. That's the point here. We both know that. We both know this is not about any of that. We are participants in an ancient battle between the two greatest minds of all time. Aristotle, the greatest source of good in history, and Plato, the greatest source of evil in history. That's what it's about here. And Christianity alternates between the two. So it's not really about Christianity as intrinsically evil or wrong. It really does depend on whether or not a particular Christian or a particular Christian institution or denomination is more Aristotelian than Platonic, at least this week anyway. I agree that the vacillation between the two is a pain in the ass, but the point is that they can be on the side of the angels sometimes. Whereas with Islam, destroyed, it burnt its bridges, they rejected Aristotle outside of the heavily westernized Muslims, who don't count as Muslims, because they've rejected, unless you've studied Islamic scripture and doctrine, it's hard to appreciate just how great a percentage of the core tenets of Islam these moderates have rejected. They've rejected virtually all of it. The reformers, for example, many of these well-known reform Muslims, they've had to cut out the entire hadith. That's like cutting out the Gospels. Literally. Imagine Jesus was a pedophile, rapist, mass-murdering scumbag like Muhammad. In order to reform Christianity, you would have to cut out the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of John, and the Gospel of Luke. You'd have to cut out basically everything that is Christianity, really, wouldn't you?
To not be allowed to, the people couldn't read it. The people weren't allowed to read the Bible at all. It wasn't.
Yeah, but that wasn't because of the Gospels. It was. I think the Old Testament and the Epistles that the church had problems with, because there's some really problematic things there. Because the church embraced a lot of Greco-Roman ideas that weren't embraced to the same degree in the New Testament. The New Testament is Greco-Roman. Paul's epistles are Platonic. He's using Platonic idealism as the background for all of it. Because this is what a lot of them did. This is what the what was his name, the Logos guy. A lot of the Greek philosophers and rabbis merged Platonic thought with Jewish mysticism. It was huge in the Roman Empire, and so there's always been a very strong Platonic element. But there are times when Jesus can sound more like Aristotle. That's principally when he's taking from Cynic and Stoic sources, which were themselves influenced by Aristotle. So you've got huge contrasts there. And the point is that Christianity straddles the fence. And I don't think it helps to sort of say it's on one side more than another. I see it as like really in the middle. It's literally right in the middle between good and evil. Whereas with Islam, it vacillated as well. There were times when Islam was quite enlightened, 9th century to 13th century. There were major Islamic scholars, again, can't remember the names, not good with Arab names, who probably they had a Muhammad in there or two, but because, it's Islam.
It's the year 1044.
Yeah. Well, there were some really great Islamic scholars in the 12th century, 13th century that heavily embraced Aristotle. They're like really into it. And then as you actually get to the 14th, 15th centuries, that's when you get more and more of these anti-Aristotelians who are anti-science and anti-reason, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so and I think that it was inevitable because there's very little Aristotelian thought in the Quran or the Hadith. Muhammad was not a believer in reason at all. He was pure authoritarian. And there's nothing there's no come let us reason together in the Quran. Nothing like that. And so, but
Aristotle from the Greek, the leftovers from Alexander's empire, they just inherited it.
Yeah. And so, yes. And so with Islam, not only have you got a more explicit rejection of Aristotle, but also you've got, as I say, the political, legal, and military principles, which have to be removed completely. I mean, as I say, you have to gut Islam of 99% of its core tenets in order to reform it, which is exactly what the reformers do. And is that tenable? Did they have to do that with Christianity? No, they didn't. They had to gut a fair percentage of it, particularly the Old Testament. But the point is, you could always use the New Testament to reinterpret the Old Testament. Christians have always done that. I could go into great detail about the Christian Reformation, what they kept, what they left in, how they changed this and changed that. But it wasn't that big a stretch to be able to come up with something reasonable, because there were always reasonable Christians. Whereas with Islam, no chance, because you will just keep getting back to Muhammad. And you can't just throw him out completely, because that's like throwing Jesus out of Christianity. At least Jesus is a moral figure, if not necessarily in the theological savior sense. Because Muhammad wasn't a savior, but the point is, he is the primary moral example. He is the moral equivalent of Jesus to Christians, period. To chuck him out completely is ridiculous. And so you either got a ridiculous version of Islam, which is untenable and unsustainable, that the typical radical cleric can rip the intellectual crap out of effortlessly. I've seen it happen so many times. It's so easy to do. I can do it. I can destroy moderate Islam. It's a joke.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Whereas if you look at moderate Christianity, it was a very convoluted process at times, but it was also understandable. They wanted to modernize, and there was room to do so. There was room to do so because, as I say, they deliberately kept Jesus apolitical, they kept him fringe, and they kept it explicitly non-military, non-legal, and non-political. And so, that being the case, there's always hope for reform within Christianity. Whereas with Islam, it's not that it's 100% impossible. It's just it's so improbable that it's actually more likely, or it would be easier to just deconvert the Muslim population as a whole. It would be easier to just get rid of Islam altogether than to reform it. It's the same thing with Nazism. Did we try to reform Nazism? No, we got rid of it. And it's the same thing with communism. This is why I can't stand liberals that keep trying to take, well, maybe Marx was right about this. Maybe Marx was right about that. Just flip the word Marx for Hitler, and you've got what I think of liberals. They keep trying to reform intrinsically evil ideas that have done nothing but kill people in the hundreds of millions. And at the end of the day, there needs to be a tipping point. People need to realize Islam can't be reformed, and it's not worth the effort. It's like Nazism and communism. There's too much blood that's already been spilt. And the idea that you can reform something that's already killed over 200 million people is seriously disturbing. But there you go. I mean, they don't look at it in terms of body count. I judge an ideology by its body count, and I will judge Christianity by its body count as well, except for the fact that a lot of the body count is due to political, legal, and military principles, which aren't derived from Christianity, but from the circumstances. So, and plus some of that body count, I actually agree with. Some elements of Christian history, I think, are actually really good. Early medieval Christianity, at times, could be extremely enlightened for its time. Again, I don't know whether you were here, but I gave this long speech about the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which was a constitutional, limited government, and with checks and balances. It was and very, very diverse. It was incredibly advanced for its time. And I think that if Christians can do that, if Christian crusaders can do that, some credit. I think that I don't think Christianity fought Western civilization's enlightenment every step of the way. I think it fought some of it, but not all of it. Some of it actually didn't exactly help, but wasn't in any way a hindrance to. And as I say, I want to be balanced here. And if you study Islam extensively and then go back to Christianity, I guarantee you have a completely different view of it. Contrast is so profound, because I studied Christianity for 20 years and I had a very negative opinion of it because there was lots of things that I just wasn't bothering to notice, I didn't care to notice. The Crusades is a good example. I just dismissed it as evil and imperialistic and all the rest of it. And then I studied the history of jihad and Muhammad. Then I looked back at the context, the 300 years before the Crusades, what Islam had been doing to the Christian world, i.e. slaughtering and destroying it. And then I looked at the Crusades again and I realized, wow, if they hadn't launched the Crusades, Western civilization probably would have been conquered from the Eastern side centuries earlier. Western civilization. And I think that they deserve 100% of the credit for that. They may not have done it for the right reasons or in the right way, because they did commit atrocities. And they did do it in order, it was basically about preserving the Holy Sepulchre. That was a huge core part of the Crusades. They were obsessed with the Holy Sepulchre. But it doesn't change the fact that for that one brief moment, the Christian world was united against a common enemy. And that resulted in tremendous benefits, military, political, cultural, scientific, because the Crusades opened up Western Europe to the Orient again for the first time since the Byzantines had lost the Middle East. And so the amount of good that came out of the Crusades is astounding. And again, they do kind of deserve credit for that. We can still take the piss out of them all the time, but I'm just saying I'm trying to be balanced here, because when it's a good thing, it is a good thing, period. It is undeniable. And even though it's surrounded by garbage, I value good so much. I value truth so much. I value morality so much. And I value Western civilization so much that when Christians occasionally do something that saves it, I mean saves it from total extermination, I got to give credit, because at the time, the Western world, Western Europe, was under attack on two fronts. On the Western front, in the Spanish side, and on the Eastern front in the Anatolian Peninsula, because the Arabs had conquered North Africa and the Middle East, and the Turks were poised to conquer Anatolia. And if they'd done that, they would have conquered Turkey, then they would have had Greece, then they would have had Hungary, and they would have, which is what did happen. But by the time they actually got to conquering Greece and Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, Western civilization had already been able to overtake them militarily, so we were basically able to eventually fight back and defeat them, particularly after the First World War. But the point is that we needed that precious time. And the Western Roman Empire was going to fall regardless of whether or not Christianity existed. But it was not guaranteed to unite and defend the Eastern side, because all the Spanish were defending the Spanish side on their own. There was very little help from the Western Europe. That they were fighting. Pretty much the Reconquista was entirely their thing. Well, not entirely, but a large. But the Eastern Roman Empire side, they'd already had their army completely destroyed in the Battle of Manzikert. And without the Latin Christian world coming to aid the Greek Christian world during the First Crusade in particular, the Constantinople would have been conquered at least 300 years earlier. And then that would have been it for Western world. We wouldn't have been able to defend from the Eastern side. Because we were already very nearly conquered. As I say, we lost Greece and we lost Hungary after we lost Constantinople. And we also had Venice that was besieged. We also had Rome that was sacked. So we were so close to being wiped out completely. It's important to remember that. Just never forgive, never forget. That's my approach to evil.
Well, point taken. I mean, like I said, we need a new crusade, and if the Christians are in charge at the end of the new crusade, then they might not be very nice to people they don't like.
No, but I'd rather take them on. I'd rather take them on than the Muslims, because there's a difference between being an asshole and being a mass murdering, genocidal psychopath.
Yeah.
I'll put up with a jerk over a serial killer any day of the week.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I'm not trying to say that the Christians are not going to be an important part in the fight, but they are going to overreact, and when they're done, when they get power, they're going to look back at all this trouble that was caused by feminism and all this bullshit, and they're going to make it like they're going to make it difficult to get a divorce. They're going to make it very difficult to get a hold of pornography. They're going to make it.
They're already doing that.
Homosexual activities will be illegal
again,
and that's okay.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we'll just have to win the same fights that we won before. I mean, we won the fights against them one time. We'll just do it again. We can beat them once. We beat them once. We can beat them again. And I don't mean destroy them. I just mean put them in their place. Because at the end of the day, I think Christianity has a role and a place in Western civilization, just a very, very contained one. And it ultimately, and I don't mean contained through force, I mean through the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, and I don't have any issue with Christianity staying around. As long as there's stupid people, there's going to be religion. It's going to be with us for a long time.
Well, they add a bit of flavor to society and life.
No, I think...
They do. As I say, I would miss, every time I go to town, every time I walk through the precinct, there's always this little group of Jehovah's Witnesses in the same place every single time I'm there. I'd miss them. I don't know about you, but I'd miss them because, it's something to talk to. While I'm ordering my kebab and I'm waiting for the thing to be cooked because it takes them ages, I usually go to the Jehovah's Witnesses and I just have a nice quiet chat with them. And it's nice. It's fine. I mean, it's...
Well, if you recall that a person, in order to be religious, has to be mistaken or deluded in some way, then you're counting on mistaken and deluded people being around for your amusement or something like that.
Well, I'm not counting on it. I'm just saying that we're going to have it anyway. And we're not going to wipe out a delusion in my lifetime. So I might as well just, go with it.
Right. Just be happy and accept.
Yeah, I need to. It's a case of picking your battles. Because, as I say, when I was dealing with these socialist Marxist types yesterday, their ideas are a violation of my rights. They are a violation of principles of freedom. They don't care. When I, for example, defended individual rights, their response was, "Oh, that's tyranny of the minority," which is ironic because they're all about giving minorities special rights and giving them special privileges and absolving them of crimes and all the rest of it. So, they are creating a tyranny of the minority. Political correctness means you can't criticize them, etc., etc. So, and that's causing a huge amount of backlash and resentment, and that's resulting in white supremacism. And they're creating the very monsters they think everybody else is already. And so, tyranny of the minority, other than obviously pandering to actual minorities, while at the same time demonizing other minorities like the 1%. Which, if you think about it, the 1% is the most obvious name of a minority you could possibly have. But the thing is, what's another example of tyranny of the minority? Centralized authoritarianism. Communist systems, Marxist system, socialist system is tyranny of the minority. The bureau chiefs are in charge. Yeah. And so they believe in the tyranny of the minority.
Ostensibly, they're doing it for the masses, right?
Yeah. Well, this is the point. The left represent both the tyranny of the majority and the tyranny of the minority, depending on how they gain power. Because there are lots of democratic socialists. There are fascistic socialists like Mussolini and Hitler. There were, tyrannical in a broader sense socialists like Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot. But there are also democratic socialists. They don't just believe in tyranny in the minority. That's going to happen with a centralized authoritarian dogmatic system anyway. But they also believe in tyranny of the majority because they cite the majority to justify their position. They believe in Athenian democracy, where the majority vote makes everything right. Because we were talking about the establishment clause, not the establishment clause, the welfare clause in the Constitution. It says we set up this country for the general welfare. Yeah, which all the founding fathers, except Hamilton, because he was a nutcase, understood that that was a very limited term, meaning the general well-being in a security sense, for example. It did not mean healthcare. It did not mean education. It did not mean ever more government, ever more taxes. Why would you bother creating a constitution with checks and balances and limitations, only to have a single, well, two words, general welfare, mean something that basically results in infinite government? That clearly is not what they meant. But the socialists from last night, their way of justifying this mindset was simple. The majority vote for it, then that's it. And I was pointing out, well, that doesn't, you're happy, you're a socialist, you're a communist, you're a slave type person. You're happy with 90% tax or 100% tax or whatever. You're genuinely, because JJ in particular is genuinely happy with that because he's demented. And so if you're happy with that, that's your malfunction. What about everybody else who isn't happy with that? And their approach, as I say, they keep reverting to the idea that the majority makes right. And if you disagree with having a 90% tax imposed upon you, then you're everything that's wrong with society. That's what he said to me. Because I specifically said, what about my self-interest? What about my self-interest says that this is not in my self-interest. And he says, so, self-interest, you're everything that's wrong with society. Self-interest is what freed the slaves. Self-interest is what those slaves that freed themselves, what do you think they were operating on? They were operating on self-interest. Self-interest is what keeps us free. It's what keeps us vital. It's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us creative. It's what keeps us diverse. And he hates that. The left hate self-interest, the most vital force in society, because they want us to be self-sacrificial. And I saw, remember the Gold speech when he says, you think that they're taking you to dark ages? They are taking you to darker ages than have ever existed. End quote. That line is chilling as hell. And I saw it in the socialists from last night. They genuinely would create a darker age than has ever existed before. They believe in crushing every last speck of individualism and freedom and self-interest from everyone. You must sacrifice to the collective completely. You must be happy within a government of potentially infinite size that can control everything and provide everything. And that's the point here. And again, he is happy with 100% tax as long as the government provided you with everything that you could need. That is slavery. That is exactly what slavery was. Labor for no money and provisions. All slaves were given the clothing by the masters, the housing by the masters, the food by the masters, and in some cases, like the house Negroes, I believe they're called in America, their education by the masters. They had free education, free in the Bernie Sanders sense. And all they had to do was work for no money. And so what they're basically talking about here is slavery. There is no difference between Marxism, socialism, communism, and slavery. They all logically are based on the same idea, that it's okay to take more from people as long as you give it back, regardless of what their choices are, regardless of what they would want. And they have no real right. And this is the scary part. This is what makes socialists and Marxists evil. They don't think you have a right to object. They think that if you object, you are wrong, you are evil, and you should basically just shut up. Right. You have no right to object.
Right. Because it's a moral.
Yeah, even that Italian socialist that I was dealing with yesterday, his response to my question about what if I don't want to pay that much taxes was, oh, you can just leave the country. Right. So I'm supposed to just surrender. I'm supposed to go into exile. I'm supposed to become a refugee, surrender my own country, my cultural birthright to you. I'm supposed to just let you take over. And they were fascists, all of them. They are democratic fascists. They believe that if you get a majority, if you brainwash enough people to go along with it, you can justify infinite government. That is democratic fascism. That is what they are. That is what these socialists and Marxists and left-wingers are. They are all democratic fascists because they don't believe in the limits on government, and they believe that the majority vote can justify any change to the Constitution. There's no intrinsic limitations on government, because if you believe that the Constitution is infinitely malleable, you don't believe in a Constitution. That's the whole point of a Constitution, to put definite limits on, to make changes here and changes there depending on circumstances or new information that we might have about economics, for example. That's why I think you and I both agree there should be an amendment to the Constitution that separates state from economics. And the reason why is because since the Founding Fathers, we've learned a lot more about free market economics that they didn't know then. After all, Adam Smith had only just published Wealth of Nations. It came out the same year. And so it was many of them hadn't read it yet, so they didn't. And even this was before Hayek, this was before Ludwig von Mises, and so they didn't understand the necessity of total separation of state and economics. If they'd known, and that's exactly the kind of thing you should have an amendment for, an amendment that grants people more rights and more freedoms. That's a good thing. An amendment that basically says people should have less rights, less freedoms, less right to object, more of their private property confiscated by the government, i.e. income tax, more and more taken away, and more responsibility given to the government, infantilizing the population, making them completely childlike and dependent upon the state, a single centralized corrupt bureaucracy for everything. That is democratic fascism. That is evil. And it's important to recognize that it is evil, and we call them evil to their faces. And then we back that up with damn good argument and evidence. But half the time I didn't need to. Their own words condemn them. But only if you pay attention. If you pay attention to what they're saying, if you bear in mind the implications, if you're not happy with the tax rate, leave the country. You have no right to object. Whatever tax rate the government decides, whatever rights they choose to deprive you of, you have no right to object to your rights being removed by the state, either because of the benign, beautiful, perfect leaders of the socialist system, or because you basically have a majority vote. Whether it's authoritarian ideology or some bizarre, perverse worship of this idea of the majority being right about everything, which is just might makes right. It doesn't matter. You're dealing with a mindset that doesn't care about other people, doesn't care about other people's choices, rights, principles. If you have a moral principle objection to certain forms of taxation, they're incapable of grasping that actually might be a valid position. And that's sociopathic. Not being able to understand other people will be affected by this. Because everybody kept going on about how they were prepared JJ was happy for an 80% tax, a 90% tax, 100% tax. He may be happy for that because he's happy to be a slave. What about people who aren't happy to be slaves?
Well, from what he sees is he thinks he's arguing from a position of morality. So practical issues
but he's a sociopath because he is not in any way registering, and other people are having trouble grasping this. He's not registering the fact that other people are going to object to that. And he has no real response other than individualism is bad. Your self-interest is
only immoral people would object.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yes, but this is the problem. How do you explain if they're arguing in terms of moral terms, then why do they then switch to an amoral pragmatism? That's the interesting thing. Because the Italian socialist from yesterday, he was arguing for his mixed system of public and private on the basis that it works. Now, again, what exactly is he saying works? He's saying that what works is a mixture between the moral and what people are doing that succeeds. Yeah. I guess I mean, as I say, we'd have to have him on again, but there's only so much of him I can take. But yes, but he seems to be not taking into account principle at all, because when I argued against that approach on principle, he basically just said thought that he'd scored an incredible intellectual broadside on me. He thought, oh, well, that's ridiculous. You're just rejecting it on whim. How dare you reject a perfectly pragmatically sound position? There's no room for principle? Apparently not. It didn't seem to occur to him that you can reject a successful government scheme on principle. He didn't seem to think that there could be anything right now. The Holocaust was a successful government program, very efficiently run, very good example of public sector spending, extremely best. Now, what possible reason could you have to object to that? There's no room for principles. And that's the kind of mindset, and it's not surprising that the Italian turns out to be a fascist, but, well, whatever.
No, not much of a surprise there. Shall I give other people the link to come on and see what happens now?
Oh, yes. I think I'll put the cat on the pigeons.
Now, shall we plan this coming Monday as a tentative first show?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Noon my time, which is 4 or 5 your time.
Yes.
We'll go on. We'll do an hour. Have a small list of 3 or 4 news items you want to talk about, and I'll have a little list of mine, and we'll probably have coinciding items. Maybe we should touch bases before and make sure we don't have the same things or something like that.
Not sure how long I could last tonight because it's 4 a.m. and it's extremely hot.
Well, I've had a couple beverages already, so I don't know how much longer I'll be going. But we'll open it up to the gang and see. But let's plan on Monday as our tentative first one, and we'll give it a try Monday and see what happens. And
I'm not sure how many we'll get. I think Brother John has a hangout as well.
Oh, does he? Yeah, he probably started one. Yeah, I'll put the thing around a few places. People were a little stressed out when I said that it might be the last one last night. So,
well, when are they canceling Google Hangout?
September 12th.
Well, we could do a few more. It might be best to wait.
They say it's moving over to YouTube, YouTube live cast or whatever.
All right. Is it already up and running on that?
Well, Brother John says he's done it from YouTube Livecast, or somebody said that. And so I went and tried it last night, and I couldn't get it to work, so I just went and did a Google Hangout. So it doesn't look easy or good to me. I had to download encoding software, and it looks like they're making it very difficult. So we'll see. They're probably trying to get everybody out of it except for big producers or something like that. They probably don't like, the average guy.
Well, they're coming down on certain producers on the basis of inappropriate content. So the censor hammer has really been coming down lately.
Yeah.
That's a bit worrying because when we're talking about censors, we know the kind of censorship we're talking about here. We're talking about feminists, SJWs, microaggressions, trigger warnings, that kind of censorship.
Yeah, and
again, this is an example where I miss the religious right because their attempts to censor stuff nowadays looks kind of quaint.
Yeah, it wasn't real quaint at the time. People did go to prison for having Playboy magazines and stuff, but
yeah. But on the other hand, it's an amusing story to tell your grandkids.
Yeah, I the right is obviously not as bad as Islam. I'll definitely go that far. But
well, this is the thing. I mean, in a sense, some Christian conservatives are actually closer to reasonable and rational than the left, and the left have more in common with Islam because they're total systems. Christian conservatives are part of the overall right-wing compartmentalization, where they have politics, but they have religion, and there's obviously a blending because they take religion seriously, but they do have other things in their lives other than politics. To a lot of the left, the politics is their entire life, and it's a total system. And in that respect, that's why a liberal is very similar to a member of ISIS, because they're both part of a single total system. Whereas many people on the right, if you look at people like Ben Shapiro, if you look at people like Milo Yiannopoulos, a lot of the things we know about them are actually not political things. I could tell you a lot about Milo's lifestyle, about his interests. Same thing with Ben Shapiro. They've got other things going on in their lives. They don't build everything around their ideology. To them, the ideology is something that they are driven to do. Because I get this a lot. I hear this a lot from Republicans and conservatives. They do this because they feel that their rights are being threatened, and they'd rather not. They're not interested in. They don't love politics. Some right wingers do. Some right wingers don't love politics. They genuinely hate doing it, but they feel that's the only way to stop a totalitarianism. And I think they genuinely mean it, and I do sympathize with them. I think Ben Shapiro would much rather be hanging around with his new family. I think he'd much rather be doing that, and it's just that, and that's the tragedy of it. I think Milo Yiannopoulos I think he'd still want to be a shit stirrer, but at the same time, I can imagine him being a shit stirrer in a million different ways rather than this one, which is a massive pain in the ass from his point of view, because he is after all, endangering his life.
Yeah.
Because he's challenging both the left, who are becoming more and more violent, and Islam that started violent and will end violent.
Yeah, and Christopher Hitchens is another example of we saw what he was doing before all this Islam stuff. He was just bumbling around, writing the occasional book and going to dinner parties and stuff.
Yeah.
And then he went on a rampage when Islam, after 9/11 and stuff. And
well, even this happened to Bill Maher as well.
Yeah.
Bill Maher calls himself a 9/11 liberal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sam Harris mentioned this. He said, can you imagine what we might be talking about right now if we haven't spent the last 10 years talking about violent Islam? You know, we're wasting so much time. We're all writing these books and stuff. What if it wasn't a problem? Yeah. What would we be doing?
Well, the problem is that the left don't want anybody to think it's a problem. We're up against a huge sort of censorship, revisionist, whitewashing culture. And as I say, the example I've been giving lately is Alan Combs on Fox News basically said that there was no contradiction between Sharia law and the Constitution, which tells me two things. One, he doesn't know anything about Sharia law, and two, this is the punchline, he clearly doesn't know anything about the Constitution, which given he's a left-winger, doesn't surprise me. And so we're dealing with people who, at the very least, knows nothing about Sharia. And then they just have this image of it as just being this quaint cultural practice like kosher is for Jews. They don't understand that it is, you can strip it down so that it's compatible. It is possible to make Sharia law compatible, but only if you strip down like 99% of it. If you ignore virtually everything about how it is applied and understood, both scripturally, historically, in terms of Quranic commentary, in terms of legal institutions today, all the four principal forms of Sunni Islam jurisprudence all have understandings, fatwas and conclusions and commentaries on Islam, which explicitly make it incompatible, totally incompatible. The way it's practiced in Saudi Arabia, incompatible with the Constitution. The way it's practiced in Pakistan, incompatible with the Constitution. Thousands of examples every single day from at least 20 Muslim countries show that whatever degree to which they practice Sharia law, there are always going to be elements that are incompatible with the Constitution. It happens all the time. To deny that much human rights abuse, because the whole point of the Constitution is to prevent such abuse. The whole point of Sharia law is to impose such abuse. They're literally total opposites. Another example, America's moral history is a troubling one because you've had segregation, you've had a lot of Ku Klux Klan, you've had slavery. And what are these things? These things are contradictions with the Constitution. This is why the Confederacy had to basically shred the Constitution. It's one of the first things they did. They wanted to create a new one because they rejected the idea that all men are created equal. And so the whole point is that the reason why America, this is the reason why America was able to reform and able to get rid of a lot of the division and prejudice and inequality isn't because of a bunch of self-righteous crusading leftists. It was because of the intellectual weight that was brought to bear against the villains, against the bad guys of history, because they were able to show that this kind of prejudice and inequality is incompatible with the Constitution. That the Constitution is the primary reason why America has got morally better over the last 150 years, why there's less inequality, because it is easy to argue against a contradiction. Because everybody understands a contradiction. Everybody can see a contradiction. Even the most basic person in the street, let alone academic, can understand a contradiction. Once you can show a contradiction, you've won the moral argument and the intellectual argument. And so, because people understand contradictions on a moral ground as well as an intellectual ground. A contradiction is unfair. A contradiction is hypocrisy. So a contradiction is both moral and intellectual and obvious to the general public. So as long as you can show that there was a principle at work in which America was founded, that all prejudice and all inequality is like rights inequality, racial inequality, obviously not economic inequality. That's a completely different thing. But as long as you can show the contradiction, you've got a moral high ground. Sharia law, on the other hand, is explicitly built on inequality. It specifically says that males have one rights and women have another set of rights. It specifically says that Muslims have one set of rights and non-Muslims, the kafirs, have another set of rights. It's an apartheid legal system, intrinsically built into the fabric, the foundation of the philosophy. So to say that a philosophy which is say that the Constitution which the principle, the high-minded principles of which has been the principal weapon against inequality for over 150 years, is the same thing as an explicit apartheid Sharia law legal system, demonstrates the total ethical and intellectual nihilism of, at the very least, Alan Combs, if not every single left-winger on the planet, or at least those who aren't named Sam Harris and Bill Maher. Here endeth the lesson.
I've finally gotten onto my YouTube page.
Yeah. Just going to get a drink.
Yep.
I'll leave you to talk to yourself.
Okay, sure thing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, live for one of the last YouTube Hangouts, joined by Seamus. Welcome, Seamus. How you doing this evening? Unmute yourself at will.
I'm good, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
That's good.
All right. Were you listening to the debate we were just having about, I guess, whether Christianity is really that nice?
Well, it's nice. It's more tame than Islam.
More arcane.
More tame.
More tame, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
Like, at least it's not completely controlling as Islam. No, Islam is very, probably the word.
Yeah.
Autocratic, is it?
How's it?
It's very autocratic.
Yeah, Islam has a very political aspect to it. Christianity less so. But we will be seeing what the Christians will do with power, because they will be returning to power. So.
Well, it depends. In the case of Europe, it depends whether or not the anti-immigration, right-wing, Pegida-like groups take power. Right now, I don't see that happening.
So you think the left is going to stay in power even with all of the terrorism and everything?
Yes, because they control every aspect of popular culture. Everything. You've got to remember, my country has been brainwashed by the BBC for 50 years. The BBC dominated terrestrial television right up until the arrival of cable. That's generations of state propaganda.
Yeah, not only that, but they probably control voting apparatuses.
They don't need to. No, they don't need to. It's completely unnecessary. I can't stress it enough. The left is Europe. This is why the left in America keep talking about how wonderful Europe is. What they mean by that is how great it is that so many of them are in charge. There is nothing. When I first started studying American politics, the thing that really struck me, the thing that shocked me, was the Republicans and the conservatives. They were like aliens to me. I'd never seen anything like it. There is nothing like the Republican Party of American conservatives in Europe. Nothing. Our Conservative Party is like your Democratic Party, and all our left-wing parties are like your Communist Party. It's that skewed. And the point is that I always thought that the European perspective was the norm, and it was normal to be that left-wing, and therefore the Republicans and Conservatives in America were like far-right nutcases. Now I realize that no, there are far-right nutcases in America, but there's also a load of far-left nutcases in America as well, whereas in my country it's nothing but far-left nutcases, and the same goes with continental Europe. So now I realize that who the real nuts are, and it's everybody, not just one side.
Yeah. Well, aren't they going to be driven towards more rational courses of action as more people get blown up by terrorists?
No, because there is no middle ground. The rational people are a part of the left, and the only people left that I mean, there's some people like Pat Condell, but for every Pat Condell who is incredibly rational, you also get a bunch of racists and white supremacists. That's the problem. White supremacists in Europe right now look like the sane people. That's what's so disturbing about the situation. This is what Jan Brooker's been talking about lately. He's been talking about, he's worried about the rise of a new European fascism because the left are so evil and insane now, because the left clearly hate European culture, and hate European people, and love the most barbaric evil culture in the world, because they're so utterly demented now and morally nihilistic that Any alternative voice now sounds better than that, even if that alternative voice is like white supremacists or whatever, and that's a huge problem. But even when there aren't white supremacists on the rise, there's this huge narrative on the left in Europe, particularly in my country, that white supremacism is on the rise. Now, it isn't in England, but there is a larger amount of it going on in continental Europe because there's more terrorist attacks in continental Europe. France has had way more terrorist attacks than Britain has. And so there is a rise of white supremacism in Europe. It's because the moderates, the people that should have already twigged as to what's really going on in Europe, are still in the politically correct camp.
Yeah, there was a time when there had been more terrorist attacks in America than in Europe, and everybody said, "Look, they hate America."
Yeah, and of course not. Because while that was going on, there were still more terrorist attacks in the Muslim world. This is what people don't understand. There's been over 25,000 deadly terrorist attacks worldwide since 9/11, and most of them have gone on the Muslim world, or in India, or in Thailand. You won't believe how many Islamic jihad attacks there are in India and Thailand, but you don't hear about it because the media don't like reporting this. The media don't want you to have a sense of perspective. They want you to think that the Muslim world is wonderful and peaceful, and except for when we go and do our evil, nasty Western bomb-dropping stuff, and then occasionally we get blowback from that in forms of terrorism. No, the terrorism in the West is not blowback for our foreign policies. The terrorism in the West is a blowback, is spillover from the terrorism that's the norm in the Muslim world. People need to understand. We get like 1% of the amount of actual terrorist attacks in the world. The rest go to either the East, the Eastern countries, who obviously aren't to blame for Western foreign policy, or they go on in the Muslim world. And yet, despite that, they try to use the fact that these terrorist attacks go on in the Muslim world. There was a recent terrorist attack in Medina, for example. They try to argue that that means it's not Islamic because they're blowing up Medina, which is ridiculous.
Marco, were you trying to say something?
Yeah.
Yes, we are going to have to reach a point where we face the fact that there is a lot of terrorism in the rest of the world, and we don't get very much of it. Yet, we are going to undergo some very large wars in order to stop all of the nonsense. That's sort of funny. That it's just like Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany. They had more problems and more deaths and more violence inside their country than any gun pointed to us, to our shores.
Yeah.
But
you didn't hear about it at the time because the left kept wanting to portray these countries as utopias. I mean, liberals were still, as late as late 50s, still trying to portray the Soviet Union as a wonderful workers' paradise, in the same way that they've been trying to do the same thing with Venezuela until very recently. And it's only because of headline after headline after headline, at least in economic circles, of terrible tragedies going on in Venezuela right now, that some of them have finally stopped for trying to portray Venezuela as the utopia that created by the great socialist Saint Hugo Chavez.
yeah, it looks pretty bad now. They're not even willing to talk about it now.
Yeah. Well, this is what happens. This is what happens with every single socialist and Marxist experiment that's ever happened. At first, all the left are absolutely, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And then when it turns out it's just an atrocity committing machine, which is what every socialist and Marxist government is, then all of a sudden it's, oh, well, we don't approve of that. That's not real socialism and Marxism. How dare you suggest that I, a liberal, approve of Stalin? That's a vicious, evil smear. Well, it wasn't a vicious smear 20 years ago when you were doing your best to try to put a positive spin on it. This is the problem here. It's not that liberals don't approve. It's not that liberals are at the extreme end of a spectrum, away, and Stalin's on the other end. Liberals promoted and constantly defend. I mean, I've seen writings from the 50s and 60s where conservatives are saying, I'm sick of the liberals defending Stalin. And this is what they were doing. Have you been advertising the Hangout to schools?
All right, I'm not sure what. Yeah, that's.
I mean, I have no objection to reaching out to a younger audience, but.
He wasn't audible on the recording, anyways.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. So I just think it's important to get a sense of historical perspective. Liberals have a history of backing evil mass murdering dictatorships. right up until the point when the general public catch on to that's what they are, and then all of a sudden it's how dare you associate me, how dare you call me a communist, how dare you call me a Stalinist. I'll call anyone on the left that defends Venezuela a Marxist psychopath because it's a country run by Marxist sociopaths that they are defending. It's as simple as that. You defend evil, and that's it. When has objectivists ever defended evil?
They're going to get to the left in Europe is going to get to a place where they build some sort of a killing machine like Venezuela has right now. So.
Well, I mean, in Venezuela they don't have a killing machine. They don't, because it's collapsing. It's at the collapse stage. But they sort of bypassed the killing machine to a certain degree. I mean, Stalin and Mao created killing machines. They deliberately killed 10, 20 million people, and another 10, 20 million people were killed because of their screw-up policies. Venezuela is in the screw-up policy phase. And so a lot of the suffering that's going on there is simply because communism and socialism and Marxism will get a large number of people killed regardless of the moral character of those in charge because it is intrinsically unworkable. And most people that died in the communist and socialist and Marxist countries didn't die because they were deliberately exterminated, but because the infrastructure collapsed, and human life on the largest scale is dependent more on infrastructure than any other single point.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It is the collapse of infrastructure that kills most people in wars, for example.
They're using crime in Venezuela to control the population, though. Crime is out of control, and they're not doing anything about it because it keeps the population under control. So.
Yes. Yeah.
An interesting way.
It's a sort of poor man's KGB. If you can't afford an actual KGB, I mean, the only reason the Soviet Union was able to afford to do anything, despite the fact that their systems are workable, apart from the fact that the West kept propping them up, was because they had a large amount of raw resources and space and population. So they had raw materials, but they obviously couldn't utilize it in any way that made any sense, which is why they're still using the same factories. Whereas in Venezuela, they haven't even got that. They don't have enough raw resources, they don't have enough people, so they have to use organized crime, and they're forging alliances with organized crime because it's the only form of organization that seems to be remotely successful. I mean, they don't even have capitalists they can get into bed with, because this is what some socialists do, like Mussolini and Hitler. Those two socialists in particular, what they did was they forged alliances with the big companies in their own time period when they were formulating their ideology, because they recognized that was successful, a source of revenue and that kind of stuff. So they were socialists, had no problem being crony capitalists at the same time as being socialists. So that's another thing people need.
They had because they available.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were Mensheviks, not Bolsheviks. They did recognize that you needed capitalism to generate the money before you could redistribute it. Only fascism practices parallel Menshevism, where instead of transitioning entirely from capitalism to communism, you basically have both running simultaneously, which is what the Scandinavians do. So technically, these Scandinavian countries that left love so much are getting their economic philosophy from Mussolini and Hitler, literally. Yeah. Because it's parallel Menshevism. And I'm not saying that they're committing atrocities. I'm just saying that it's Mussolini and Hitler's economic philosophy. That's all I'm saying. Just a simple statement of fact. Draw your own conclusions.
They might end up in the area of committing atrocities at some point if they keep going.
Well, they don't have to. They don't have to. They're importing atrocity committers.
Yeah. Well,
so,
that's functionally the same thing.
Yeah, well, the difference, it's kind of a reverse Holocaust. The Nazis committed Holocaust against an indigenous against a minority population. Whereas what's happening is the opposite of that. They're allowing minorities to commit atrocities against them.
Yeah.
This is why they like that Sweden now hides all rape statistics when it comes to immigration. If rapes are committed by Arabs, Muslims, immigrants, they do not include those statistics anymore, and they haven't since 2014, I think, because everybody was talking about how Oslo was now the rape capital of the world, and things like that.
And 99% of those rapes are committed by immigrants.
Yes, which is probably still true, because Sweden is a very politically correct country. I mean, that's why there's so many feminists there. I mean, feminists can smell weakness, and so they typically criticize people who are the least sexist in society. Which is a fascinating strategy, you've got to give them that.
It's hilarious. I wonder how many of those feminist chicks are inviting all these Muslims because they can't get any good dick in their own country, and they want to get some good, violent, angry cock.
Well, there's going to be a lot of repression there, unfortunately. And Muslims aren't as fussy, and given that most feminists are ugly, horrible people, there could be some truth there. But I don't want to get too much into the disturbing psychology of psychopathic ideologues.
Yeah.
I've been doing that. I've been getting into the heads of some very evil people lately, and it hasn't been pleasant. I mean, again, actual evil, not hyperbole. Actual evil. Because remember, we're objectivists. We believe in good and evil, unlike just about everybody else. Most people in the world don't believe in good and evil. Let that thought sink in. That is a truly disturbing thought. Even the religious right, who believe in divine command theory, they don't really believe in good and evil either. They don't believe in intrinsic goods and evils. They believe in a deity whose every order is intrinsically good. Because it's an order from God, not because everything he does is necessary. They assume that it's good. But there's no actual consistent principle. There's no logic to it. If he orders you to kill your firstborn son, that's good somehow. They're not quite sure why it's good or how it's good, but they're sure somehow, because God is intrinsically good and the source of all good, that it has to be good. That's the problem with divine command theory. It's the same with genocide. I've seen Christian apologists defend the times that God orders Joshua or Saul to commit ethnic cleansing, and it's explicit. 1 Samuel 15. Read 1 Samuel 15. It's explicit when he says, kill every man, woman, child, and donkey. Kill all the Amalekites. Commit mass murder and mass genocide against the civilian population, women and children. It specifically says that that's what they're supposed to do under God's orders. And so under divine command theory, genocide is good under certain circumstances. And that's the point. That's not moral absolutes. That's amoral authoritarianism. That's total authoritarianism. There's no room for morality there. They don't believe, the religious right do not believe in moral absolutes. They like to think that they do, but actually they don't. The left don't have any morality at all, and the right's morality is purely authoritarian. So nobody really believes in actual good and evil, except, as far as I can see, objectivists. I can't find anyone else that actually believes in good and evil, and that's really, really disturbing. I'm probably wrong. There's probably some group I'm forgetting, but I don't know. Buddhists, they believe in good and evil?
They believe that if you let go of everything that exists and you let go of yourself, you'll be left only with happiness.
Right. I never
Yeah.
quite understood that myself. I mean, I've participated in Buddhist rituals, and I just get bored.
Yeah, well, if it's I want happiness, let go of I and let go of want.
Yeah.
Very, very
Okay.
clever, yeah.
Andrew the Red has said, good and evil as metaphysical? No. Good and evil as intrinsic, logical forms of principle and action. So it depends what you mean by metaphysical, not ethereal. It's not transcendent or anything. The religious right don't believe in good and evil at all. They don't believe that there's anything that is any action or principle that is intrinsically good or evil under divine command theory, because God could technically order anything to be done, and regardless of what it is, it would have to be regarded as good. At least, as I say, I'm talking about Christians that subscribe to divine command theory.
Yeah, they
I don't
believe only in the will of God, not in good and evil.
Yeah.
Good and evil are a result of the will of God.
Yes, and so it's to say that's just amoral authoritarianism. That's just following the authority. You can call it good, but it's just a label placed on the actual nature of the authority or the nature of the orders. They believe that God is good. They believe God exists, and they believe God is good. I could sooner believe God exists than believe He's good. That to me is the biggest stretch.
There could be an evil, sadistic God.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Why can't God be evil?
Yeah, that's a point Hitchens made. He said, why couldn't he just be a God who makes us all suffer, and then at the end it's all a joke and we die anyway and there's no heaven or hell?
Yeah. Would explain a few things, wouldn't it? No, I mean, this is the thing. You have to, certain things, what would you say is a moral absolute? I would say that genocide is an absolute evil. I would say that slavery is an absolute evil. I'd say that rape is an absolute evil. I'd say that pedophilia is an absolute evil. I could sit here listing things, and we can argue why they're absolute evils. The violation of individual rights, violation of freedoms, they destroy the psychological and physical well-being of people. They reduce quality of life. They are always justified on the basis of lies and hate. We could come up with huge numbers of reasons why large numbers of things are either intrinsic goods or intrinsic evils. And there are some mitigating circumstances with some of them, but there are many, many things where there are no mitigating circumstances. There's no mitigating circumstances for pedophilia. There's no mitigating circumstances for genocide. There's no mitigating circumstances for rape. I mean, we can argue about grey areas, about is it statutory rape if it's a 17-year-old in this state or that state and that kind of thing. But I'm talking like, when it's a violent rape, raping a stranger, things like that. So there are plenty of examples where, it's absolutely wrong. There's no question of that. And who else can say that? Who else can argue that there are things that are intrinsically right and wrong?
It's not the communists, because then they would have principles, and that would screw up their whole system.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the funny thing that I had happen was some socialist talking with me in a Google Hangout claimed to be an objectivist. And I said, really? How so? And he just thought, I guess because he's met all these objectivists and they sound rather smart and rather intelligent, he thought he'll claim to be in that camp. But one of his opinions is that we should have a social security, safety, welfare net, and taxes that are sufficient to that end and so on.
Yeah.
I was like, then how are you an objectivist? What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
But it's getting to the point where... What's that?
Wasn't it that atheist guy from last night?
Yeah, Sydney. And
yeah.
It's getting to the point where objectivists sound good enough that you can want to be part of their group and claim that you just got some slightly different opinions on certain things.
Yes, because they miss the point. I mean, as I demonstrated, it wasn't me that actually got JJ to admit that he was basically for slavery. It was someone else. But basically, what's to stop 10% income tax redistribution becoming 20%, becoming 30%, becoming 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and then 100? Then you have literal slavery. What's to stop that? Where's the line? Where's the limit? My limit is at a 0%. And anything other than 0% income tax is a slippery slope to slavery, period. As JJ demonstrated last night. It wasn't just him. I didn't see any of the other. There were 4 socialists in the hangout last night. I didn't see any of them object to that. None of them. It was the libertarians and the conservatives that were there that were objecting. They honestly don't see what's wrong with slavery. That's what's so messed up. So when they talk about wage slavery within a free market, I just have to laugh. Like you have anything against actual slavery. Because again, it's not like there's anything about their ideology which says that it should never go above 30% income tax or 40% income tax. There's nothing. There's no limit there. There's no principle of limits. The only way to have limit is to have 0. Period.
There is a state. There are some states in America that have 0 income tax. The federal government continues to tax even if you live there, but
yeah.
New Hampshire's one of them. Have you heard of the Free State Project?
Yes.
They triggered they've got a 2,000 minimum or whatever, and they've triggered the move, and so everyone's supposed to move there within the next 5 years now. They just announced it.
Well, Texas has a 0 corporate tax, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which has been causing huge numbers of companies to go to Texas.
It's very good. It's a very good environment. Nevada also has a very low or 0 corporate tax and 0 warehouse tax in Nevada. So you can actually warehouse stuff off the grid as far as taxes are concerned.
Wow.
So it's.
I mean, can you imagine how many jobs that's made? Can you imagine how much good, objective good that's made?
Yeah,
and that's good created by doing nothing. That's the wonderful thing about the free market. You can have good things happen without having to do anything. And I think that's the problem with the left-wing mindset. They don't like the idea of leaving people alone. They don't like the idea of doing nothing.
Yeah, that's their big itch.
Yeah, because it's not that they do nothing. It's that they work in the private sector. That's how you do good. You want to do good, be the next Bill Gates. You'll do far more good than Bernie Sanders will ever do. don't be the current Bill Gates, be the original Bill Gates, not the current version that was replaced by a robot. Because I don't know what's going on there. I guess again, it's a sanction of the victim psychology, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's Reardon halfway through Atlas Shrugged, not in the second half though.
As far as I know, his wife took over all his money and is running some kind of charity group.
Yeah, there's something like that's going on. I keep seeing pictures of them together and never him alone. So maybe she's the puppet master.
I think he was just an altruist and a Platonist at heart. So when the government started bothering him, he didn't have any moral backing to question it.
Yeah, because the government really laid into him. I mean, the government just bullied Microsoft to a tremendous degree. I mean, everybody was talking about the Netscape thing, the trust issue, and he doesn't seem to. He has acknowledged that because of the current regulatory suffocation in America, you couldn't create Microsoft today. He couldn't do what he did back then with the amount of regulation. So he admits that he's for something which would prevent him from getting the money that he's using to on these supposedly good projects. I don't get how he works at all.
Now, Steve Jobs is a better example of the
Yeah, it's only because he's dead. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Steve Jobs died before he became the villain, and unfortunately, Bill Gates is Two-Face. That's tragic. So the sooner Batman throws him off a balcony, the better, quite frankly.
Yeah, he's definitely gone. So the Free State Project, Andrew, have you heard of that?
Yep. Yeah, I used to listen to Free Talk Live every now and then.
I don't know if they are going to be effective, but they've got the minimum number now to trigger the required move. I was signed up for it and went to some lengths to get my name off the list. Because they're all zero aggression principle people, and none of them saw any problem with Islam back in the day. But that'll be funny if they end up with a free economy state right next to Vermont, Bernie Sanders' home turf. That'll be hilarious.
I'm on Free Talk Radio right now, and the number one article is Gary Johnson is a complete idiot.
Oh, I don't know what to do about Johnson.
Well, if a whole bunch of libertarians actually moved to New Hampshire, I'm not sure how productive New Hampshire would be. I don't know if they'd all get jobs. They'd all probably want to be teachers or something. So
That
I
would
don't
be
know.
good. I wouldn't object to that. Libertarian teachers, that would be nice.
Right?
If John Stossel was my teacher at school, I would have loved it. Or Penn Jillette, even better. Fat Penn Jillette, proper Penn Jillette, not thin Penn Jillette.
Yeah, you know what? That's funny. About a year ago, I think it was maybe a year ago or so, I just kind of came across a Penn Jillette video, and holy shit, he lost a ton of weight, and I hadn't seen him since then. And he just looked so weird, and I kind of missed the big Penn Jillette, but I imagine he must be healthier now.
Oh yes, I mean it's better for him, and I obviously want Penn Jillette to live a long, happy life, but I also want him to be fat. Now, what can I say? I want to have my cake and eat it. I'm going to break into his house in the middle of the night with a syringe and just start slowly injecting fat back into him.
Yeah.
I think it was Ray Kurzweil that he calls him Crazy Ray, who helped him do the diet, put him on the diet, and whatever, supervised him. And he had him eat potatoes for 2 weeks straight, nothing but raw potatoes.
Yeah.
And
it's Paul Joseph Watson that's going after Gary Johnson. That's interesting.
Joseph Watson.
Paul Joseph Watson. He's InfoWars, but he's not a conspiracy nut. He's like the good guy at InfoWars. His videos are phenomenal. He's Pat Condell sort of thing. And he
I've
is
seen his
laying
stuff
into Gary Johnson. Pardon?
You saw his stuff where, Andrew?
I've seen his stuff online, but I'm politically.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't even heard of him. So.
Yeah, well, as I say, he's an up and comer. He's kind of like Milo Yiannopoulos, kind of like Ben Shapiro. He's very, very good, and sounds exactly like me, which is a bit weird.
Oh, I might know the guy. He does some of his videos are done in front of a world map or something like that?
Yes, that's him.
I know him.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically he's a sort of smaller version of me, basically, because I'm huge. But yes, he's really laying into Gary Johnson right now because Gary Johnson is a domesticated libertarian. He's a good libertarian.
He's milk toast.
Yeah,
Milk toast
and that's
libertarian.
this
He's
is
an
this is
appeaser.
why, yeah, this is why I really wanted what was his name? Because there were 3 libertarian candidates this year. There was McCaffrey, the antivirus guy, Gary Johnson, and Austin Peterson. And I liked Austin Peterson. I was disappointed he didn't get in because he's a very down to earth kind of guy.
Yeah, he was a younger and a more constitutionalist type.
Yeah.
McAfee definitely had the biggest edge, but he's a drug. He's way like I don't know if he does drugs now, but you could see the effects of his drug use even now. Like some of his what do you call them? Not like his twitches. You can still tell.
Well, this is one of the problems with libertarians. It's not that libertarians are pro-drugs necessarily. It's just that they're anti-stopping people from using them, which is my policy too. I don't think any drugs should be illegal because it just creates more problems than it creates. But I am against drug use. I am morally against drug use. I'm morally against gambling. You know, I really, really am morally against gambling on sort of all sorts of grounds. And so I'm against a lot of things that I would allow because I'm not a fascist. So, you know, it's an important distinction to make. But I really, drug use, I just, wasn't that South Park episode that basically had a really good argument? It makes you comfortable with not achieving anything.
Yeah. Yeah, there is far too much emphasis about legalizing drugs and libertarianism. Way too much emphasis. I think it's just too much. Of course, they just want to use it. It's not.
Yeah,
like, it's not as important as other issues.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they weren't just appealing to tokeheads, they would have it on their platform, and that's fine. But it shouldn't be a priority if they're not into it. If they just want to allow it, as I say, like I do, because in the 19th century, for example, every drug was legal in Britain. You could basically get anything, and the what kept it in check was moral condemnation, because back then people actually had moral values. There was a tremendous moral pressure that was put on people in the 19th century. And so the amount of public disdain about people spending a lot of time in opium dens was enormous. That's why there's a lot of that. If you read Sherlock Holmes stories, for example, there's a lot of detail about the people in opium dens because it was such a horrifying spectacle. But it never occurred to anybody to make it illegal because the Victorians weren't fascists, ironically.
Sherlock Holmes addicted to cocaine.
Cocaine?
Yeah. It's at the end of one of his stories. Pretty good story. Dr. Watson meets his future wife and he said, "Well, Holmes, what do you get now?" And he reaches for his cocaine vial.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't addicted to it. He basically took it whenever he was bored. Because the problem is he had a hyperactive brain, which is my problem too. He probably had ADHD. And so he took the cocaine whenever he didn't have a case. Because he's one of these people that, we're talking about a fictional character here, but never mind. He's one of these people that can take stuff and he won't get addicted because he can stop it like that. My mom was the same way. She smoked up until like she became pregnant, and then she just stopped, and that was it. Never had any cravings or anything. And so it's one of those things. Addiction is a will thing, a personality thing, and a chemical thing. It's a mixture of all sorts.
Well, I smoke cannabis at the odd time, but I wouldn't do it as much as other people drink alcohol. I do it, maybe once a month. Just
as long as
instead of going out drinking.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing with alcohol. I drink alcohol once every 6 months. You know, it really is. It has zero effect on me, and it's the same thing with what's the other thing that you
that's pretty tiny compared to Mr. Cropper there.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's the same thing with junk food. There's nothing wrong with McDonald's as at most once a week, but any more than that, you're pushing it. And it's just some people can do that. Pardon?
Everything in moderation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the sort of Epicurean principle, and it's just that some people can't do that. Some people can't moderate. Some people can't control themselves. Some people lose it. But because of them, you should ban everything for everybody else. Most people can drink in moderation. Most people can eat McDonald's in moderation, and it's not.
That
And that's what annoys me. The worst of society, the people with the most problems, aren't morally condemned. They are made the blueprint by which everybody else's behavior must be forced to accommodate by law.
We're
You know,
accountable for their actions.
yeah, it's insufferable. You know, I can smoke pot, I can smoke
lately,
cigarettes. Uh, Pardon?
lately I've been enjoying craft beer and trying one about once a week, like a nice dark ale or a stout or something like that. But some
Yeah,
people like to drink, 5 or 6 of the lightest, worst beer possible.
yeah. I'm not quite sure whether that's good or bad because if it's light, does that mean it won't destroy your liver, or does it make a difference?
No difference.
Yeah. Well, that is disturbing. Well, in that case, they need an intervention, because I'm a great believer in interventions. I love them. They're great. But because that's the job. It's the job of friends and community and family to help people. I'm a great believer in voluntary collectivism, except for the fact that's largely a contradiction in terms. That's why we don't use the term collectivism to describe that kind of behavior, because it's best to keep it to involuntary, so that the term has a nasty ring to it, as it should do. The term collectivism should make shivers come down your spine. But to make it illegal is to basically say to everybody else, we don't trust you to be able to control yourself. We're going to treat you like you're an addict. We're going to treat you like you have a will problem. And it's insulting.
Let me ask you, in Britain, do you have alcohol in the grocery stores, or do you have to go to a
Yes.
government building?
No. No, no. Alcohol's. See, the thing is, we actually have very loose laws when it comes to certain things, like gambling. Gambling is allowed to any degree. There's zero control over gambling in the UK, pretty much. It's everywhere. There's gambling shops in every street, literally. There's lottery machines in every single grocery store. It is absolutely everywhere, and it's not regulated or anything. And quite frankly, it annoys the hell out of me. But I wouldn't think to regulate it. I would think to start some sort of moral, philosophical campaign against it on the basis that it's stupid.
In the town where I'm from, there's a there's a bookies beside nearly every pub. Just so people be drinking, then they go in and gamble. It's
Yeah,
that constant loop.
yeah, that's
Pretty
exactly it.
bad.
And yeah, and it's a symptom of irrationality. It's a symptom of hopelessness, because the poorer people are, the more they gamble, because the less they think they have to lose. They're not thinking long term. Think of all the money you could save by not gambling. I mean,
That's
it's
real.
yeah, they're not. It's not rational self-interest. It's irrational self-interest. Or at least it's because I understand people get a thrill out of it, but you can get a thrill out of playing a video game that doesn't cost you anything. There's like thousands of free video games right now that can get you a buzz of doing any number of things that cost you nothing. And I think that's one of my problems with a lot of this gambling. It doesn't have to be. All you have to do is get immersed in something like Call of Duty. I'd rather people play Call of Duty than gamble, because at least they're not, wasting money and destroying either their own lives or that of their families.
Call of Duty can't make you any money though.
Yeah, well, some people can. Some people make money on Call of Duty when they live stream. In fact, that kind of live streaming stuff is actually quite getting big business. But I'm just sort of assuming that the 1 in 17 million chance for a national lottery, for example, is not really worth factoring into. It's what we
It's
call
for
statistically
people.
insignificant.
Lotteries and gambling are just a tax on the poor, because those are the
Yes.
people who
So
tend to buy that
same
stuff.
same thing with cigarettes.
The mathematically illiterate.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with cigarettes, because as I say, it's not that they're mathematically illiterate, it's that they figure out they have less to lose. This is why poor people are more in favor of communism than rich people. It's because the poor figure out that they'll get a percentage of the rich's money, and that they don't have to. They
Like
don't
that
have to.
hangout you join every now and then.
Yeah, yeah. And they basically, if they don't have all that much, then they don't have. Then having to fork over everything doesn't actually cost them anything. You know, it's the same. Christianity began the same way. They had loads of poor people join, and every now and again a rich person would join, and that would be a huge boon to everybody else. And the poor people had no problem with sharing over all their money, giving all of their money over to the apostles, because they didn't have anything to begin with, and so it was a net win for them. So it actually is a clever calculation, in a sense, for both communism and gambling. It's a clever calculation for the poor, except for the fact that they're going to be trapped in a system that they have no way out of. But some people don't mind being slaves, as was demonstrated last night. Some people have zero problem with actual slavery, and people need to understand they're that demented.
That's a question I was hoping to throw out there. Do you think people naturally want to be an individual, or they naturally want to go with the group?
If you look at children, it's both. I mean, children, they cry when they're alone, and they cry when they're told to do things. So they want to go their own way, but at the same time they want the group. It depends on the mood, time of day, personality. We're both gregarious and we're individuals, and we balance between the two. Sometimes, most of the time, I just want to be on my own, but every now and again, I just want to hang around with some friends, and it has to be my choice. That's the point.
Most of the time,
when you decide that it's in your best interest to enforce a collective on everyone else, you're denying everybody else's rights, choice, freedom, individualism, privacy, and everything else.
Seamus, I take it you like to be alone mostly?
Yeah, I like to be alone. I like to be in solitude, just read my books, do a bit of research, do a bit of studying. But I like to go out the odd time. I live in the countryside, live in the middle of nowhere, so I wake up and then I have to go into the city to go to college, so I'm surrounded by people. So that's pretty much it. That's how I basically socialize when I go to college. Get people.
Ireland?
When I'm off on the weekends, I want to be alone.
Is that in Ireland?
Yeah.
Ireland?
Ireland.
It's Ireland.
Ireland.
Ireland. Never heard them say Ireland, actually. No, I haven't heard that one.
Andrew's from Canada, so he doesn't know what that's all about.
No, dear.
Nice people.
Yep.
The tip was.
Yep, and we elect really nice people into office too. We elect useful idiots into office.
I never really was interested in Canadian politics, I always think Canada's just a bit irrelevant. No offense, but that Thoreau guy just
our Prime Minister is going to be on Time Magazine's hottest men of 2016 or whatever.
Is that why he got elected? Because he's cute?
Yes.
Probably.
Yes, that is exactly. I was following the Canadian election religiously, and that was basically it. The guy, what was the guy's name? Turner, the guy that lost. He is the dullest looking human being. Yeah, Harper. That's it, Harper. Yeah, he was okay. Harper was okay, but he was the dullest looking person you'll ever hear. Everything he was a dry little bureaucrat. He looked like one anyway. Whereas Trudeau was dashing. And he's another Tony Blair. He's another Obama. He's
one thing that was odd. One thing that was strange, but we probably should change the topic, is Harper was running a third term, which I think is unprecedented in Canada. So I don't know why the Conservatives did that up here, but anyways, let's talk about something more important.
No, well, it is important because Canada's it does dictate. I mean, a lot of people in America on the left look to Canada as like a role model. So when Canada, and the other way around, I mean, that, as I say, a lot of people who voted for Trudeau voted for him because they wanted another Obama, and he does love to take lots of pictures, have lots of pictures of himself taken hanging around Muslims. So there is that kind of a vote for Trudeau is a vote for multiculturalism and political correctness, and what could possibly go wrong? Apart from obviously like Canadian soldiers being shot in the streets, but apart from that, what could possibly go wrong?
Yep, that's exactly right.
It's smug, insufferable idiots who don't understand anything.
So here's another topic that I'll see if anyone's interested in. So I got a magazine and there's a magazine article here in front of me. I got it from in Canada. There's various teacher professional organizations that you have to be in to teach in the public schools, and I'm a part of that. And they send their magazine every season, and there's a little article here about what this teacher is doing in her grade 7-8 geoliteracy classroom, where she explores world issues and encourages global awareness. So listen to this. I'll just read a little bit of it. So one of the first things she does in her class is she puts a bucket at the front of the class, and all the students, right, they're all in rows, right? They each have a crumpled piece of paper, and they all have to try to throw their piece of paper into the bucket at the front of the class when they're sitting in their seats. And they all have to try to get this piece of paper in this bucket. So, of course, the people at the front have a fairly easy shot. And as you go to the back of the room, you have a lot more misses. And then that brings in this topic of, well, is it fair that other people have disadvantages and are further away? And
Yeah, because economics can just be explained entirely in terms of rows of chairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's always analogies with them because they can't actually talk about actual economics. They have an ideal, they have an ideology, a narrative, and a moral philosophy, what they think is a moral philosophy, but they don't approach economics with any actual economics. That's the problem here, because because in order to redistribute all the chairs, you'd have to deny the property rights of everybody. And what have you got then? You've got a bunch of people who are entirely at the mercy of the state. They have no independence, no motive to actually work above the subsistence level, and basically they have no recourse, no liberties, no freedoms, no opportunities, nothing. Everything is controlled, and everyone is equal, and that's why all those communist countries kill millions of people and have mile-long break queues, etc. I mean, it's just redistributing chairs is just redistributing chairs. Redistributing money is destroying every single element of the economy which allows for prosperity, independence, and any form of self-respect, any form of self-interest. And it's basically just a matter of you know, are you an individualist or are you a collectivist? And the collectivists are the ones reducing economics to chairs and ignoring the fact that every single philosophy that has ever followed that principle has resulted in mass starvation and mass death.
Yeah, for the left, that's a very good tactic, though, to tell the kids, the further you are away from the bucket, the less fair it is for you. Everybody's equal except your distance from the bucket, you know, and then the kids can overgeneralize into economics without thinking about any of the things in between. Yeah. Yeah. And they just walk away with the idea that it's unfair and there's unfairness in society, and if you don't get a job or if you're poor or whatever, then it's just because of unfairness.
Yeah, because reality is complicated.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly what those kids walk away with, and they lack the knowledge and the insight and the maturity to investigate that more, and that's what they're stuck with, and then they're disgruntled, and then the emotion sets in, and then that's it, right?
Yep, that's the end. That's all the left wants to do. They don't want to start an education or give them a principle to think about for life. They just want to indoctrinate them with one particular idea, and it's a stale idea. They bolt it in place, and that's that.
Yeah, because if you dumb something down, if you simplify it enough, and it's not just that they're simplifying economics, they're simplifying terms like equality. I mean, it's like because the Yaron Brook does this. He talks about how you make everybody equal in terms of their ability to play basketball. What does that mean? It means breaking the legs of Michael Jordan. It means destroying the most successful, because you can't make everybody Michael Jordan, but you can make everybody crippled. And so it's easier to destroy rather than create when it comes to equality. It's the path of least resistance. And so you're frequently, when you're talking about equality, what you're talking about is reducing everything. You're not talking about raising everything. The idea that you're going to have all the chairs are going to be in the front. No, all the chairs are going to be at the back. It's a lot easier to do that in economics, and that's the difference between economics and chairs. Chairs can be placed in any order. There's no fundamental principle. Whereas wealth is finite, wealth is generated. Wealth is not a zero-sum game. But in order to generate it perpetually, you need economic liberty. And the moment you start rearranging the economy according to an ideology or a perfect totalitarian Marxist model, you're basically saying destroying the race system that allows for any degree of prosperity, and what you end up with is, in every single time, a more and more even share of less and less resources. So it's more evenly distributed, but with less to evenly distribute. They don't understand how you grow the economy. How do you generate wealth? How do you create more complexity and more order in the economy? And it's fundamentally about the individual and the power of the individual mind, as well as the subsistence barrier. I dealt with this yesterday. Whenever you have an economy, throughout most of history, for tens of thousands of years, human beings as hunter-gatherers worked at a subsistence level. There was no energy reason to work beyond the minimum required to keep you alive. You hunted until you got the animal you needed to live for that day, and then you didn't do anything else. And it wasn't until we had the ability to store food that we worked beyond the subsistence level, and that allowed us to have a much larger population. And then again, with the agricultural revolution, then we were able to developed so much efficiency in agriculture that most people weren't needed in the fields anymore, so they went into the cities, and then they started working for wages which can be saved indefinitely and to a potentially infinite amount, which meant you had an infinite goal to work towards. You had infinite, in other words, you had infinite incentive to work harder and harder and harder. And so that improved the efficiency of the economy, and et cetera, et cetera.
Now, you said the government would put the chairs at the back of the room, because that's...
Yes, that's why it's a bad analogy.
Over in the comments here, Adam says the government creates the chairs at the front systematically in this analogy. Elaborate on why you say they're at the back, because they can make it more difficult for people. Because
economics isn't a chair. Economics is more like a wheat field, where you have loads of little seeds, and some seeds grow taller than other seeds. And the whole idea is that if you want all the seeds to be equal, if you want all the stalks, if you want all the shoots to be of equal length, how do you make all the shoots in a field equal length? You cut them all down to the lowest level. How do you? Because you can't control the individual growth, not in a free society, because you basically have a system where all the seeds are developing under their own power in a free society. Whereas there's no way of making a seed grow faster. At least not economically. It doesn't work that way. Not because you can't make someone work, harder than they ordinarily would without actually creating an incentive. And how do you create that incentive? You pay them more depending on how much they earn. And that's the opposite of what they do in communism, because in communism it's from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. It's not to each according to their ability. That's capitalism. In capitalism you're paid more if you work harder, etc. At least that's the principle. And so you can actually make each individual seed, at least on average, work more and produce more, but they won't be even. Because, as I say, the only way to make all the seeds grow to an even height is to cut it down to the lowest level.
Well, if Adam wants to reply to that, sir, if you want to...
Because if you how do you make the seeds grow higher in this analogy? You basically get a load of lamps and you put the lamps over the field, but that's not going to make all the seeds grow at the same height, because there's those different factors that control whether or not because you can't micromanage every single seed.
But maybe what he means is like the government makes it easier for everybody to get a house or an apartment or something. If he wants to.
But how? How? This is why we ended up with the 2008 housing bubble and crash. The Great Recession, as it's called, was caused primarily by the fact that the government was basically subsidizing what was the term? I keep forgetting the term. They were subsidizing subprime mortgages. That's it. And as a result, they were creating a bubble that was because the loans were not based on actual market logic. They were based on ideologically set. They had quotas. So the government said you've got to have this many poor people, you've got to have this many minorities getting houses, and it was ideologically dictated, and it was not in any way determined by actual merit assessments or financial assessments, and so you ended up with a market based on fiction, because that's what governments do. That's what ideology does. Ideology is fiction. Government claims are fiction. Market is about real numbers. It's about real economic.
So the housing crash is the government's fault. It's not the fault of the businesses that were giving out predatory, faulty loans.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Because the government,
Gotcha.
the government made them. The government made laws that basically made them. Subprime mortgages was government control.
Okay,
Look,
well, why don't we
it's
go
ground-
back to my idea of letting Walmart be the government and letting Walmart give out housing loans?
Is it Groundhog Day? I
Yeah,
woke
yeah,
up in Groundhog Day.
yeah. I know. It's a stock record.
Well, you keep saying that the market is so awesome, and I throw out a very successful company, one of the most successful companies ever in America, and you don't like it. You don't like, make up your fucking minds.
You're talking nonsense. That's what I don't like. You're saying that choosing a successful company as the government makes no sense, because the government is there to keep rule of law in place and to protect individual rights. That's a role that the government has. You don't need. There's no other factor there. There's no corporations do their thing, governments do their thing. Corporations, governments are governments, because they both have discrete, different roles. That's the point of separation of state and economics. That's the point of capitalism. That's the point of private enterprise maintained through rule of law. That is a very simple process that I've explained over and over and over again, and you keep babbling about Walmart. You have no coherent point to make.
You keep saying that the market
You're
is
wasting
wonderful.
everybody's time.
You
are
keep saying the
timing
market's
yourself.
wonderful, and I'm giving you an example of
No,
an
not giving you an
incredibly
example of anything.
successful
You're-
business on the market, and you keep putting them down. I don't get it. Neo, do you want to add anything?
I'm not putting them down and saying, why do you keep insisting that they should be a government in any hypothetical scenario? That's nonsensical.
Why can't Walmart handle all the loans? Neo, do you want to say anything?
Why would you want one company handling everything?
I agree with him about the whole law thing. Do we live in different countries? Do we live in the U.S. and you live in the U.K.? I think that's probably the miscommunication error.
No, both countries are based on rule of law. Britain developed the rule of law. It was a fundamental backbone of our society, which we exploited across the world. And America is a really profound example of rule of law. We're both talking the same language. We're both working on the same principles. It makes no difference.
Right.
It's one of the few things we do definitely have in common.
But I think the thing that's missing is a lot of Americans see things as effed up in America.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Right. The problem is that people can't correctly diagnose why it's effed up because they're economic illiterates.
Yeah, that's right. The problem is economic literacy. I was going to say that.
Yeah. And
that's why Bernie Sanders was up, because of economic illiteracy.
Yeah, because how often do you? I mean, other than John Stossel, I can't think of anybody on like a primetime TV that actually even mentions ever Austrian economics. Nobody else talks about any real economic principles. There's just endless quotes from Paul Krugman, and that's it. He's like the only standard they have, and he's not an economist. He's an ideological fraud. But he's the gold standard. He's the guy with the New York article, the New York Times editorial.
Well, they're still running on the Keynesian ideas from the World War periods.
Yeah.
Step on the gas when the economy's doing bad.
You realize that Keynesian economics is still applicable to today, right?
No.
No.
Still applicable? What does that even mean? What do you mean it's still applicable? It's either true or it's untrue.
Yeah, it was never applicable because it's not
What
true.
do you mean applicable?
He doesn't know what he means. It's not a true theory, so it's never been applicable. It's always been a disaster that's caused the great.
So in the last recession, Keynesian economics played no role whatsoever in that, in getting us out of it.
No, just in causing it. Only in causing, prolonging, and worsening it.
Because it all depends
really
on.
Going to be
Well, this is why I use the seeds in a field analogy, because the seeds are the individuals that are working for their own self-interest at their own rate, for their own reasons, their own motives, and their own environments, in their own circumstances. Whereas the problem with Keynesianism and all leftist economics, for want of a better word, I prefer ideological socialist rationalization. The problem with that is that they see the market more as a cycle. They see it as a sort of flow, a circular flow, is the Keynesian term. And it's not a single cycle. It's loads of individuals working their own way. It's a vast network at most. The idea of it's a single cycle that you can change by basically just pushing it this way or that way is a grotesque oversimplification. All you're doing is you're basically going through the fields like an actual hurricane. The cycle is a ideological fiction that is imposed upon the market like a hurricane. So they think it's a cycle, but what they're doing is creating a cycle through government activity. So the government acts as if the economy is a cycle, and so it imposes a cycle form of force on the market, and that cycle is going through the actual fields, just creating crop circles. Wow, my analogy went in the wrong direction. But yeah, that's basically it. Leftist economics is crop circles in a field. It's just flattening everything and ruining a perfectly good harvest. Is NeoCloud capable of actually contributing? Does NeoCloud have a microphone? Because he's been typing stuff and he hasn't said anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you want me to talk and not type, because I'm sorry. I thought I explained earlier. I had typed in the side chat to Brad. I was trying to I have implants. I'm the first person in America to have implants, so it's hard for me to talk sometimes.
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry.
I just wanted to know if you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, I can't. I was just typing because I was just telling you my position. That's all. I don't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Okay. Do you want to respond to what I said about Keynesian economics? Because that's exactly what America did, and we have one of the best economies in the Western world right now.
Oh, I agree with that. Capitalism is like the monster of the world.
Every policy that Obama did, every policy that Obama carried out was Keynesian economics.
Right, so how come Texas is more economically successful than the other state, and how come a large amount of the financial improvements, not that there has been much, is due to fracking?
Why does America have the most advanced military on the planet? That's another question.
We're talking about economics.
Is this discussion worth having?
Not really, no, because we're just addressing left-wing talking points. Bringing in the military doesn't really apply. I mean, it's a left-wing bug that they want to get out, and it's not actually pertinent to this issue. We're talking specifically about economic policies by the government.
What the hell is that?
You keep on saying that I just know that Obama hasn't done anything. I just know he hasn't. It's all fraudulent. It's all fake, and you're wrong. There's multiple sources out there that support the fact of what our economy's state currently is, and you're wrong about it.
Right. What have I said that's wrong?
You don't live in America as well. You want to tell me how my economy is? That's funny to me.
You care about is your worldview. You found some factoid that supports your worldview, and you're going to stick to that until you die.
Yeah. It's my worldview. It's the fucking facts about unemployment numbers. Okay, you're a fucking idiot from the Department of Labor.
Obviously, you're not here to learn anything.
Yeah, it's my worldview. So the Department of Labor has nothing to fucking do with it. It's just my worldview. You're a fucking moron.
Right. Write a book and sell it.
I disagree.
According to you, every single statistic from the Department of Labor is fraudulent. Every statistic from any government agency is fraudulent.
I disagree with him, by the way. I'm sorry, I disagree with him now. I disagree with his candor and his demeanor right now. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure Mr. Cropper said exactly the same thing too. You can direct quote him as well. Yep, you got us.
Yeah, okay. I'll address NeoCloud's argument about capitalism. I disagree.
I'm not making an argument. It's just an opinion because
I know. I just thought I'd no. I'm not
I think down corner kind of affected me. I'm sorry. Down corner kind of. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not.
I just thought I'd mention it. The reason why I support capitalism is because in economic history, if you look at the history of economics,
just dismiss what I said. 14.4 million jobs were added, but that's fraudulent as well. It's not real, right? But why don't you disprove that fact?
Well, because NeoCloud is polite and you're a troll. That's why.
Yeah, I'm a troll because I don't agree with you.
No, you're a troll because you
are, dude. Put on your tinfoil fucking hat. You're a fucking conspiracy theorist, nutbag, nutwing, who knows nothing about my country. But you want to tell me economically how things are when I live here and I spend my money in my country.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
I spend my money in my country every single day, and I see how things are. But you know how they are for real.
I don't think you've ever fought in the military, down corner. You've obviously never fought in the military.
Yo, Neo, what does it have to do with the state of the economy in America right now?
No person in the military would state that.
Yo, Neil, what does it have to do with the state of the economy right now? Why are you guys so incredibly inept? Like why?
Because
Like,
you
what is the
think,
deal?
okay, so a military guy like my father is going to tell everybody that we're a joke? Come on, man. Really? Military men? You know,
They're
come
so
on,
inept.
man.
Okay, here's the fact of the matter. Okay, President Obama employed Keynesian tactics to get us out of the recession. We are out of the recession due to financial stimulus packages. The GDP in America is better now than it was when Obama came in to office and how it was under Bush. 14.4 million jobs have been created. The unemployment rate is 4.9%. The Dow and the S&P 500 are at record highs, as is the Nasdaq, far above what it was even in the .com era. The pay of Americans has gone up. Housing prices have recovered. I mean, what do you guys want? What do you fucking want?
Well, I could go.
We
I could
don't know
address
why you're
every,
here.
Yeah, I could address every single one of those. I mean, you're talking about
It's not worth the time.
pay
though.
going up, for example. How much of that improvement in payment is due to government forcing employers to pay people more?
Okay.
How much of that is natural, and how much of that is artificial, and because it's forced?
You know what? It's all artificial, man. You are totally right. I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on. The economy is shit right now. We have the same economy that East Germany had. It is fucking horrible, man. America is just total shit right now. Everything is fucking horrible, dude. Nobody can find a job. Nobody can make a fucking living. I mean, everything is crazy bad, dude. And the fucking apocalypse is coming.
Okay. Anyway, NeoCloud. I will address the capitalism. I judge by results. I judge by the actual aggregate amount of wealth generated.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. What happens is that if you look at the history of economics, if you look at the history of economic growth, of wealth growth, most people were dirt poor throughout most of recorded history. Whether it was the Stone Age, whether it was the Neolithic Age, whatever period you're talking about here, up until fairly recently, most people were poor, most people worked in the fields. And what happened is there was a two-stage process. One, technology improved that allowed a far smaller percentage of the population to work in the field.
I agree fully. Yeah,
but then what happened is you had a greater degree of private property developed, because first you had a feudal system where you had a handful of barons and earls that owned most of the land, and most of the people were basically tenants, and they were basically quasi-slaves.
Yes,
And then
nothing you're saying disagrees with anything I'm saying. Go ahead.
Then what happened was the enclosure movement. This began in my country, where more and more of the barons and earls, because they weren't running things very well, began running out of money. And so they ended up having to sell off more and more of their land to private owners, like merchants.
Yeah, my grandfather did that, by the way.
Yeah. And so you ended up with more and more people having more and more of a personal, private share of the land. And so private property, individual initiative, allowed for a greater degree of independent experiments in land ownership and land conservation. And that resulted in successful experiments being replicated and bad experiments being basically just isolated to those small independent farms. And this principle was then carried on in every other area, including the Industrial Revolution, where private enterprise, small private enterprise, multiple independent experiments became the model for all forms of economic growth and development. The multiple experiment model, which is used in science, it is used in democracy, it is used in law, in the state system. It is the gold standard for all progress.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I've heard.
Capitalism is part of that process. It is part of a broader process of independent experiment. That's why capitalism is good. The problem is that capitalism has been hijacked.
Yes, it has. Oh my God, you're getting to the point. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's the point. So when Mr. Cropper and I talk about capitalism being great, we're talking about what it's supposed to be, not what it actually is. It right now is
no longer what it was meant for. That's a lot of movements. Every movement that you've heard of today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and so the point is that the problem is that when a lot of people attack capitalism, they're really attacking a warped lie version that's really just fascism. Or crony capitalism, it's all the same thing.
Or feminism, or you could go down a list of isms that have been hijacked that had been hijacked, like you said. You know,
Yeah, I mean, feminism was hijacked in the 80s. Civil rights was hijacked in the 70s. All these movements.
isms. It's
Yeah,
isms
yeah.
and
They
isms.
were. Some of them actually started out quite well, but they were all hijacked. And capitalism was hijacked. The worst, because we believe that the worst possible economic system is what we have right now. It's worse than communism. Communism.
Socialism was hijacked as well.
Well, no, I mean, socialism was always bad, but the problem is that you can't hijack a bad idea. The problem is that the results were bad because the idea was bad, and the problem is that people don't
Right, but
admit that it was bad to begin with, and so they assume it
fascism.
was
I mean,
hijacked.
you go down a list of isms and
Yeah, yeah,
ists. Yeah, right. I
yeah,
mean,
but
they were
the
all
thing is,
hijacked, and even socialism was hijacked at one
well,
point. You gotta admit it, yeah.
it was there were different variations of it. I wouldn't call it hijacking, but it's a semantic thing. The point is that at least with communism, it's a limited problem because eventually it collapses very quickly. The problem with fascism or a mixed economy, which is what we have now, which
Exactly.
is heavy government regulation and also government private sector
But
corrupting
here's the
and
point:
buying
is
politicians.
capitalism has survived somehow. I
No,
can't
it
tell you
hasn't.
how.
It's sort of it's half dead. It's on
It
life
is,
support.
but it is half dead. But people are just not awake.
Yeah.
They
Well,
don't.
the problem.
Yeah, the whole problem with capitalism is it's about keeping people asleep.
Well, that's not capitalism. That's fascism. That's what we
Right,
have. We
right,
have a
right. But I mean,
fascist
it's
system.
almost the same thing. Now they've kind of turned it into that kind of thing,
Yeah.
like
Well,
where people, yeah,
they began in the 1930s.
exactly.
That's what Hitler and Mussolini did. They
But
basically got
did you know
they got the
in the
big
1930s
businesses.
they said how much gold does the Federal Reserve own? We haven't owned gold since ever. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
we
because
just
you switch
yeah.
by switching to fiat currency, you give the government too much power over the economy. But Mussolini and Hitler really began this because they basically wanted to create a version of socialism that that was not that didn't scare away the big companies. So they got into bed with the big companies and they basically
Central
created
banking.
fascism. Yeah, that sort of thing. And ever since then, have big government, big regulation, and crony capitalism has been the norm. Hitler and Mussolini won, and we
It's
are
a
all
network.
fascists, and
It's a
that's the kind of situation we
network
can
of
have.
money. It's a
Yeah,
money network.
it's the worst kind of system because it can last for a lot longer. That's the problem. Communism is all of one bad idea and it's unsustainable, whereas fascism is a mixture of a good idea and
Why
a
are
bad
we
idea,
enslaving
and that keeps
people?
it going.
Why are we enslaving people? I don't.
Well,
This whole
because
you see what
people
I'm
think
saying?
it's for a greater good. Now, people argue that it's. We dealt with this yesterday. There was a guy yesterday who basically argued for 100% tax, and he said it would be good as long as the government gave us everything that we need. That's slavery, and he didn't see the problem with slavery because he
Oh
doesn't have any
my God!
independent
Oh my
self-respect.
God! This is how deluded they are.
Yes,
They
yes.
really do believe. They believe that your mommy and daddy can't take care of you, therefore your government is
Yeah.
your mom
Well,
and
in
daddy.
many respects, unfortunately, mummy and daddy can't take care of you because the society we have now has destroyed the family. And so a lot of the time, the mother and father can't. This was,
Oh
again,
my
this was
God!
developed by the Nazis.
I
That
can't.
Hitler,
Yes, exactly.
yeah,
The
the
Nazis
Hit,
used to. Oh my God,
yeah,
man! You're getting yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
then Hitler created these love camps where young Aryan boys and girls would basically have unprotected sex with no supervision, and then the men would go off to fight in the front, and the girls would stay behind. And the whole point is that the children would then be raised by the state. They were called Hitler's children, and this so the government deliberately
Oh my
cultivated a culture of single motherhood
It
so
was
as to
worse than that.
indoctrinate. Yeah, they indoctrinated. It was eugenics and it was
Hmm.
indoctrination, and
It
that's
was
where
worse.
so a lot of the Hitler youth were actually from
Hmm.
single mother backgrounds that were deliberately created because the father in the family, the male in the family, the force of authority was
Yep.
the state, and
Yep.
by destroying fatherhood, they got to create the fatherland, and
They would
that's the
actually
irony.
create. What's it called? You remember that video game called Mass Effect,
Yes,
where the genocide, or what is it called, the genophage,
yes,
where
yeah,
where they would sterilize people.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
That,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's population control. Subsidizing single motherhood is population control. Subsidizing abortion
Perfectly
is
compatible with socialism, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's all the same thing. Fascism is basically the combination of evil plus good. That's the disturbing thing. You see, evil eventually collapses because evil is incompetent, whereas good is productive, good is growth, good is success, good is life. And what they did is they took capitalism, which is good and about life, and they combined it with socialism, which is about evil and death. And so they created an evil system that could last a lot longer, potentially forever, than a communist system, which, because it's pure evil rather than a mixture, collapses a lot quicker. You see, by it's like a perpetual motion machine, theoretically. Fascism can last for a lot longer because it keeps capitalism in a cage and basically sort of uses it as a sort of slave pet rather than as the free creature that it was meant to be. And so they keep something meant to be free in a cage so that they can keep the machine going forever. And they can keep people brainwashed, they keep people dependent by destroying the family, by destroying the individual, by destroying the idea of like moral absolutes. They can keep people in the relative fog where nothing is right, nothing is wrong. The state can do what they want as long as they have majority vote. Then that can justify anything, which is just right. And people are so confused and they're so traumatized by politically correct brainwashing that they don't know what the problems in their society are, and so they're not demanding change. Or when they are demanding change, it's just something really stupid, like changing personal pronouns and stuff like that, rather than addressing the fact that we have black on black violence, we have breakdown of black families, for example. Where are all the people campaigning against the real problems?
By the way, Andrew,
they're all busy campaigning
you
against
just
progress.
explained the Matrix, by the way.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, all governments try to be the Matrix. Every government in history has tried to be the Matrix. The Matrix is actually based on Greek philosophy. It's based on Plato's allegory of the caves. It's actually based on Greek philosophy. So this actually goes back to ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks were actually the original Wachowskis. They actually deliberately promoted this idea called the noble lie, or a royal illusion. The whole idea of creating a society based on illusion so that they can be more precisely manipulated. Because if you ever, yeah,
Keep
because
the
if
masses in the dark.
yeah, because keep them in the cave. If you have a society based on truth, if you have a government that acknowledges truth independent of itself, then you're basically at the mercy of reality. Whereas if the government can completely control reality, if the government can monopolize, this is known as an epistemological monopoly. If they can control all of reality, if authority is the source of truth, then you basically have the ability to control
That's what
every
Hitler said.
single.
Hitler
Yeah,
said that. Hitler said that. If
this
I
is based.
control the textbooks, I control the world.
This is based on
Remember
Plato.
that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Every single evil ideology in history goes back to Plato, at least in the West, because that's what he said. If you can, a lie is better for a leader than the truth, because you can tailor a lie to any particular social agenda that you have. You can construct divisions. His example was a government could claim that we have different kinds of blood. That means that we have to have different kinds of roles in society. And this is the same. This is the same way that government lies about race or gender or class or whatever. And they use these divisions, whether they're real or not, whether they exist or not, to create different strata in society, different layers, so that they can be controlled from different angles. They can it's divide and conquer basically, and it's divide and control. And a lot of the controls, a lot of the divisions in our society are based on total lies because they're more useful than the truth. The moment that the government admits that there's truth outside of itself, it is at the mercy of reality and the mercy of independent minds. And so the last thing government wants is the idea of truth outside of authority. And this goes, as I say, this is Plato. This is why Aristotle was the greatest good that ever lived, because he said you can have truth independent of authority, truth independent of the state, which is why when Western civilization, whenever it's going in a bad direction, is going in Plato, in good direction is going in Aristotle. So all Western civilization is essentially alternating between that good and that evil.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we should get paid to do what we're doing right.
Yes, we should.
Like as a job. I
Yes.
don't see. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I agree. I should be getting paid for this. I'm solving every single problem in society for free, and I'm getting nothing for it. All I get is a bunch of socialist assholes that keep trolling me.
Hey guys, is it possible for me to just get a mic check?
Yeah, you're quiet.
Okay, I'm trying to be actually. I've got family around, so
Ah,
that's okay.
right.
I'm just checking it. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we're exhausting all of this energy. We have real jobs. We bust our asses to feed our children,
Actually,
and
this
take
is
care
my
of our
job.
wives, and all this kind of stuff. And I can't understand why people are so fake on here. You don't talk to somebody like this in a checkout grocery line.
I do.
Well, I know you do, but
Yeah.
but I'm talking about the fake people, the
Yeah.
people that I'm talking about.
Well,
If
I
you
mean,
want to talk like a real person, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah. Well,
Like,
the problem is,
don't sit here and BS us all night, because
yeah,
that's what people do.
yeah.
It's like an ego stroking competition.
Well, it's
You know what I'm talking about?
yes, it's a circle jerk. It's that's what collectivism is. Collectivism is psychological reinforcement through managed agreement. Basically, everybody agrees and everybody feels good about being around people that agree with them. And so it's good that we have people that disagree with us, but
I
just
don't
because we have,
agree with you fully with what you
yeah,
said. I
that's
agree
fine,
with
that's fine.
90%
Yeah,
of what you
well,
said, but I
that's
don't
fine.
agree with you. Exactly.
Yeah, the
Right.
problem is that a lot of people that disagree with us disagree because they're insecure and they're angry and they're bigoted. We get people here, some of them Christian, but most Christians we have are okay, but sometimes we get Christians that just hate atheists, like really bigoted, real hate. And we get socialists that hate right-wingers, that hate conservatives, hate, and all they want to do is come in, attack and attack and attack. And so I don't mind that because I thrive on conflict. So I certainly enjoy
I
it
agree
that
with
way.
90%
You
of
know,
what you said.
yeah, but
90% of what you said. Yeah.
but the problem is a lot of people don't want to talk. They don't want a conversation. They
Right.
don't want to intellectually engage. They want to destroy you.
But it's
And
not exactly, and I say this all the time. Me and you could get along so well.
yeah, because at the end of the day, we want to actually work out what the truth
Who
is.
are you?
Whereas
Who are you? You're
I'm Ed,
nobody. You're
I'm Edward
nothing.
Lecore.
I'm
Yeah,
somebody, right? To you.
yeah,
But this is, you see what I'm saying? Oh my God, man.
yeah,
You
yeah.
get,
Well, this is the point. I'm not here to destroy other people. I'm here to destroy certain ideas, but in order to do that, I have to intellectually engage with people. The problem with a
exactly.
lot of people on the left is that they're not out to destroy the idea; they're out to destroy the people. This is why, like people like Milo Yiannopoulos get banned from Twitter because they're not interested in you intellectually
Yes.
engaging with him.
Yes.
Out to simply erase him. The
I
deep,
bow down. I bow down to you, sir. I
yeah.
bow down. That's it.
Yeah.
You just said,
This is
yeah,
this is why we get these people that are so angry all the time. They come on here
exactly.
and they shout and they scream because
Oh
they
my
want to destroy
God.
you. They can't destroy your ideas.
They
I
want
can
to
I can
add
quote
you
these
to the
statistics.
list.
Yeah.
They want to add you to the list of the defeated people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well,
exactly.
this is what happened last night. We had this Christian apologist on.
Yeah.
I assume he was, and he was out to basically destroy me as an
Mhm.
atheist. And I don't want that. I want an actual conversation with Christians. I have
Hey,
zero
I'm
problem
a
talking to Christians.
Christian.
Yeah,
I'm a
well, that's
Christian, but I have a lot of freaking atheist friends.
yeah. Well, that's
I'm,
because you're not a jerk. And
all
and
right.
the problem is it isn't Christianity. It is that certain people are so insecure
Like the
about their
Westboro
worldview.
Baptist Church.
Yeah. They do want to destroy the person, not the idea. Because to actually engage with another idea you disagree with is scary to them.
You're not an
People are,
atheist. See, now you're not an atheist to me anymore. And I said that as a joke.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
joke. Yeah,
No. I mean,
because you are
I don't.
actually, because once you become reasonable, you're not saying that God doesn't exist. You're
No,
not saying
no.
that hold on. Let me explain it this way. You're not saying that what I believe is delusional.
Well, it depends. I mean,
Well, what I'm saying is delusional. What they
yeah,
say might be delusional, but
yeah.
you haven't heard what I've said. So how could exactly?
Yeah,
I mean,
well, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I can say you could say a specific sentence or a specific claim, and I might regard that specific claim as delusional. I'm not going to make a grand
I'm
assumption.
sorry to take over the room. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I wanted you to. That was the whole point because because I could tell you were a reasonable person from what you were typing, and we just needed a breath of fresh air from the jackass.
Oh man, you wouldn't believe how hard it is. It's. I'm
Yeah,
like I'm just relieved. Like I'm almost crying about this kind of shit.
yeah. I
It's
know.
become so ridiculous. It's like I do this
Well,
all day. Sometimes when I yell at people, it's because I'm so frustrated of why they don't want to have a
it's because
reasonable
they're
conversation.
it's because they approach their worldview in the wrong order.
You
See,
see,
I started out with no assumptions, and I basically said, okay, what are the best tools for figuring out what the
by
truth
the way,
is?
can I explain who I am? I build computers. I graduated computer science, network engineering. I work for Verizon. This is my computer that I hand built. That my video card draws 400 watts off of my power supply. That's how powerful.
Oh, that's not bad. You should see mine.
That's impressive to anybody that knows
Yeah.
about
I
computers.
I do, yeah.
400 watts. That's yeah.
Well,
Are you using
my power
the
supply is more. My power supply is 650.
1,000 watt laser PSU LED Q block. All that, you know. What I built makes people cry when they come over. They're like, "Holy shit!"
How many hard drives you got stacked in there?
I've got 4 terabytes of hard drive space, and I've got 500 gigabytes of SSD space. I mean, I could list things all night that would make you
What's
cry.
the biggest? What's the biggest solid state? What's the biggest solid state they got these days that's not really expensive?
They have a processor now that has 128 cores. I'm not lying to you. They're testing it out at this moment at AMD. 128 cores.
How big is it though?
It's the same die size as you're using now.
Oh,
That's not bad.
Yeah.
I'm
I
I'm
think
trying to,
AMD has killed Intel when it comes to cores.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm all about the graphics card.
Oh, the
But
graphics
when are
card.
we-
Okay, so the graphics card I have is an MSI 290X or 390X actually, and it can be water cooled and overclocked to like 2 gigahertz GPU speed, which is like unheard of.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also has like almost 16 gigabytes of video RAM.
Well, I was planning to get a GTX 1080 with
Yeah.
Pascal architecture.
Those things are great.
Yeah,
I love them.
because I need it. I have an Oculus Rift, so I need something that's specifically designed for VR, and that's the Pascal chips.
He does a simpler thing, and I think AMD actually works closely more with the VR makers than NVIDIA does
Yeah.
in some aspects to some video games. So it's all about what game you want to play. If you're like a Halo kind of Microsoft guy, or if you're like a PS4 kind of like it's really about marketing techniques.
Yeah, I'm trying to get Star Citizen to work now, which is the highest
I
demanded.
have Star Citizen, by the way.
It does not work that well, unfortunately, at this point. So I'm clearly doing something wrong, because that's the ultimate game to test your graphics card. But there's not
Or
much.
testing. Crisis used to be the ultimate testing for anybody's graphics, by the way. The first Crisis game,
Yes, I
did you
got
know
that,
the
yeah.
first Crisis game crashed NASA's supercomputer? Did you ever hear that?
Yeah. Well, I don't like the CryEngine anyway. I'm a big fan of Unreal 4.
But that's pretty insane, though. That a
Neo.
game could crash NASA's computer.
Neo, how many flux capacitors do you have in that tower?
About 65.
Yeah, not bad.
Hey,
Hey, Sean.
Edward, is your
Sean,
icon from Baldur's Gate?
Sean, I just wanted to say no hard feelings. I love you, bro. Real quick.
My icon is from the Secret World.
By
Which
the
is
way, Sean and Scott know each other. The guy that you just booted out of the room, yeah. Same guy.
The first part of the Secret
Just
World
worse.
with the Cluthu world is actually quite neat. And the boss fight's actually quite good.
Yeah. Well, I joined the dragon. That's the symbol for the dragon, for the Secret World. So, I think.
Oh my god, that game is awesome.
Yeah, it was really good. I think it was the first MMO to use ground tessellation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very nice.
It destroys computers with
Yes,
low
it does.
graphics. Yeah. There's a
Well,
lot of things the problem is games aren't specifically made for that kind of graphics level. Like you have to get a specific graphics card to achieve that kind of, you know what I'm saying, thing. So if you use an AMD card, it doesn't have the tessellation and the options to choose that kind of thing. If you get a NVIDIA card, it may be able to have NVIDIA enabled because there's actually options in your
Yes, there is,
to enable that kind of stuff. And there's the biggest difference between when I play AMD cards compared to NVIDIA cards because I build computers all the time. And there's an option that you can choose to enable, like freaking NVIDIA options that you cannot enable on AMD cards.
Well, this is why I stick with GeForce. I like the options.
Hmm.
So, and to go back to politics, the reason why I like gaming and the reason why I like gaming culture is because it teaches you to accept defeat and to actually deal with competition as a major part of your life.
That is politics.
Yeah, which is psychologically healthy.
Yep.
Whereas if you look at the people who are against forms of competition, they're against the competitive market, they're against competition in schools, they want everybody to get participation trophies, they don't believe in handing out bronze and gold and silver medals. That kind of anti-competitive attitude, I worry about what the future generations will be like when they get into the real world and they can't cope with it because the real world actually does work on competition. Not because of ideology, but simply because that's reality.
Oh my God, we would be best friends. I would say that word for word, except for I would add to that and say, instead of individualism.
Yeah.
Remember when video games used to be about in the 90s where we used to cooperate with each other to achieve yeah, remember that?
Yeah, and that's individualism too. As long as it's voluntary cooperation, that's individualism. Yeah, but I mean, I still do that. I mean, I play WoW a lot, and I'm part of a guild. We're raiding mythic dungeons right now, which requires tremendous cooperation, which is why we have to use a voice chat. And so there's still a lot of there's still a lot.
Blizzard still does that kind of thing.
Yes, because they're awesome.
I used to bend a long time ago when I played WoW when it began, and raided Molten Core and up to Burning Crusade expansion set. But then I quit.
Well, it's getting very good now. They brought the latest expansions very good.
Well, there's actually a funny story. There's a funny story on YouTube. If you look up a YouTube video about Jimmy, look up World of Warcraft Jimmy story, and where these two guys actually quit the game because of they poisoned each other's cults or whatever you want to say. You know what I'm saying? They poisoned each other's factions and went against each other because they started to hate each other. And then one day Jimmy didn't respond, and his friend said, "Where's Jimmy?" And his mother responded and said, "Jimmy is no longer allowed to play World of Warcraft."
Yeah, well, that's taking it the wrong way. That's why you should always make sure you're in the same guild and the same faction. But the point I was making about politics is that
Horde all the way.
Yeah, well, I'm Horde for life. Yes, all my characters are the trolls.
Politics, though. That was politics in World of Warcraft.
Yeah, but I'm talking about actual politics in the gaming as a whole, because I'm thinking of things like comparing what happened in the atheist and skeptical communities with what happened in the gaming industry and gaming culture. When the feminists tried to take over the atheists and skeptics, all the atheists and skeptics rolled over because they were a bunch of beta males.
Well, I have to stop you with the word compare. Use the word relate if you can.
Yeah. Well, and then when the feminists tried to take over the gaming industry, because we thrive on competition, we didn't roll over for them. We actually fought back with Gamergate and various other cultural backlashes against their attempts to take over. And so I'm thinking of all the ways in which people are psychologically healthier because of gaming. Because there are examples in real life that teach you the same messages, but not everybody has access to like sporting teams and other things that would teach you about both cooperation and competition.
Well, the agenda today is making globally minded citizens, right?
Yes.
Which is exactly what that article was I was reading before, too. That's the implicit assumption.
Yeah, because you can't hold a global ideology to account like you can in national government, and so globalization basically means infinite power. Because who holds the UN to account? Who holds the EU to account? The reason why my country left the EU, which is one of the greatest things we've ever done, apart from accidentally creating America, was that because the reason why we left the EU is because we don't trust anonymous Brussels bureaucrats that aren't democratically accountable. And then the left don't have a problem with that because they regard the highest authority to be always the best. The higher the better. The higher beyond the national level, the better. And so international is better than national because they think that all nationalism is bad. Whereas in fact, of course, the only way to realistically deal with bad nationalism is good nationalism. Or the good countries with bad countries. And they think, no, the solution is to get rid of countries and to get rid of borders and to have one world government. So what's to stop the one world government from being evil? Nothing. And particularly as a higher level from the national level, it'll be even further removed from the people than a national government is. It's hard enough to keep a national government from being corrupt and unrepresentative. You try doing that with the UN. The UN and the EU are 1,000 times more corrupt than national governments because they're 1,000 times less accountable. And so they don't understand that. They don't understand basic Enlightenment principles. Every single thing the human race has achieved in the last 150 years has been flushed down the toilet by the left. It's astounding.
Here, listen to this. This is from the article that's related to what you're talking about. It's talking about the Syrian refugee stuff, right? So what this teacher, what they did is there was some MP in Canada that was speaking out against what he felt was an unrealistic timeline for welcoming fleeing Syrians to Canada, which triggered lively discussions around immigration. A girl in grade 7 wasn't the only one asking, why do we have to take them in? Aren't they going to take all our jobs? Many felt differently after the teacher played an animated YouTube video that explained the facts surrounding the refugee crisis.
Facts?
So,
YouTube
of course.
videos are facts nowadays because YouTube videos are absolute facts.
Yeah.
Well, they are when I'm
someone
on.
has a business too, then we have to correct them, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, YouTube videos are also the solution. I mean, I'm thinking the number of misconceptions that Prager videos address. Prager videos, I mean, not all of them, but there's a large number of Prager videos, Prager University, that address and are actually really good at countering. Not necessarily because they're true, but at least they're a counter message. At least they're a counter narrative. I prefer the truth rather than counter narrative, but I'll settle for counter narrative right now because at least there's balance. This is why I used to hate Fox News, and now I love them, because I recognize the level of bias in the other channels, so we need Fox to balance it out, at least until we get some truth.
Fox has been exploding in viewership, too, if you look at the viewing numbers. But one thing I want to say, though, the PragerU videos are fantastic. Why isn't the Ayn Rand Institute not doing more stuff like that?
Yeah, tell me about it.
They should.
Their YouTube presence is abysmal.
Well, this is what I want to do. I want to do a series of videos. I need animators. I need graphic designers. I could do it myself with my carpal tunnel, so I can't do everything. I would love to be able to do a series of videos explaining these basic principles. And the Ayn Rand Institute do have some good graphic designers, but they're just not producing anything. So I think they've got like one person working for them. That's it.
Yeah, but I think the problem is the Institute likes to hold things to the chest, you know?
Yeah, because they don't.
He said the Institute like at a Fallout 4.
Well, they don't. They're afraid of dissolving into a subset of libertarianism. They're paranoid about turning into libertarians because that's what has happened to certain objectivists whose values have just sort of turned into mush. They want to maintain ideological or philosophical or moral integrity, depending on how you want to define it, which is perfectly good. But there's ways of doing
I can't understand why you're not a Christian. I mean, why? See, I had somebody ask me the same question. Why aren't you a Muslim?
Yeah. Well,
you see where I was going down that lane. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same issue. Reason is my God, basically, and I basically don't accept anything as true unless my personal, independent, rational mind can grasp it as true. So I have to understand it.
That's something I can't prove to you all. Why I'm a Christian would be irrelevant to all of you.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, to me, the reasons why you have a position are more important than the position itself. You can have the most seemingly insane position ever, but if you can back it up with solid logic and evidence, I'll tip my hat to you. That's all they care about. And the other people don't operate that way. They don't
It
care.
will always be that way, though.
Yeah. But they don't care why you have the position. They just care that it's a position they disagree with, and they feel they must destroy you.
I know you understand it. It will always be that way. Like
Yeah.
every time, it will always be. Unless you believe it,
Yeah.
good luck.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm looking through my pages of notes. If you hear me flipping through them to counter, not to counter, but just to relate to what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah.
I have like millions of pages of notes that I've heard you guys and everybody talk about on here that has that kind of subject. Is that a relation, not a comparison? And how are we to know who is genuine or not?
Well, reason.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody should objectively take a step back, remove their psychological involvement, because most
You may
people
call me unreasonable.
Well, no, it depends. I mean, in some way, we all sort of have different views on different issues that are reasonable to different degrees. So I know some people, for example, with whom I agree with 99%, but then they'll have one issue where they are completely insane. And to me, it's all about being consistent. I need to make sure that every one of the little things that I normally don't think about or take for granted or just assume are true have been checked and verified just as much as the other stuff.
Exactly.
It's intellectual consistency.
All right, so one of my sayings is the tools are there. It depends on how you use them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, in terms of like thoroughness and consistency. So everybody uses logic, but most people only use it in tiny doses, in rare instances. You need to use it all the time, as much as possible. Or at least in areas where it applies. Obviously, logic doesn't apply to one's taste in music, for example, necessarily.
Reason.
Yeah.
William Lane Craig gives 5 things that science can't prove, but were reasonable to believe. One of those things is logic.
You can prove logic.
So, it's kind of a circular argument. Like, you cannot prove logic through science.
Well, you can, because you can make a logical statement and then test it. A lot of scientific theories were based on pure logical.
All right, we're gonna skip that one because that one could go all night. All right, but the second thing is mathematics.
You can prove mathematics because you can verify the formulas. Einstein's theory of relativity was purely mathematical, and we used scientific instruments in super precise systems in satellites recently to prove gravitational length.
I know where you're, okay. Let me just go down the list for you really quickly. I'm not gonna sit here and argue with you. I hope you could actually come up with something and get these 5 things. I could show you.
I am doing so.
So okay, the third thing is oh, by the way, the last thing is science itself. You can't, because it would become a circular argument. You can't prove science with science. Blah blah blah. It's irrelevant. I get it. But the fourth thing is beauty. Things that are subjective, like science can't prove if somebody is that's a philosophical thing.
You can actually. Yeah, it's philosophical because aesthetics is an Aristotelian philosophical principle.
The aesthetic argument that he gives. Yeah.
But there are certain common factors that are common among all human beings. For example, human beings find diluted pupils more sexually or visually appealing than undiluted ones because it's actually a symptom of it's a subconscious
that's not necessarily
of arousal.
True,
No, that's why our pupils dilate. It's a subconscious signal of attraction. This is you see, it's called sexual selection. Basically, works by each gender basically selecting for things that are genetically desirable on a we're not consciously aware of it, but we have certain standards of beauty which are actually based on genetics.
Why are you an atheist? I can't. So good. You sound like a Christian. Every time you sound exactly like somebody that believes in intelligent design. Whether it be an alien, whether it be something else, you sound. That's the argument that we give I can't understand why an
Well,
atheist
no,
would give
sexual
that kind of
selection.
argument.
Sexual selection isn't designed in any conscious sense.
It sounds
It's
that's the argument that we give, though.
right. Well, no, this is just sexual selection. This is Darwinian sexual selection. Darwin came up with this
I
along with
understand
natural
it.
selection,
I
and
get it.
and so the whole idea is that males are the way they are because that's what females admire: upper body strength and extraneous development.
Right.
That's what a beard is. A beard is like a mane on a lion. It's
Yep.
it's a character trait that females select for because it represents an investment of unnecessary energy. It's the same with the peacock. If you are able to
Yeah.
develop an unnecessary component, it proves you have resources to spare. So it's like a diamond ring or whatever. And so a lot of our features, which we universally regard as attractive, are actually based on objective genetic reasoning. So
Mhm.
no, there is actually objective standards to a lot of beauty. For example,
Well,
we are
even
psychologically
yeah,
calmed by the color green, and we are
exactly.
alarmed by the
I
color
agree with
red.
you. Yeah.
Because green is an environmentally common color and red is not. And so we find red more alarming. Again, there's loads and loads of ways in which you can. I agree that there's a lot of subjectivity in art, but
Yeah.
there's also issues of universal objective standards.
Yeah.
That's a completely different debate, though.
It's like subjective and objective. It's like there's no word for it yet. This one, there's no word in the dictionary to prove that something is either or. Some people work in absolutes, as you had mentioned.
Yeah, but there are good
You know what I'm
absolutes, and there are good absolutes and there are bad absolutes.
Well, I'm gonna make a joke. You remember the Sith
Yeah,
from they work in
yeah,
absolute and the Jedi don't, yeah. So
yeah. Well,
the
the problem
bad
is that.
guys work in absolutes. The good guys don't.
Yeah,
It's
but
like
the problem is that historically the bad guys don't work in absolutes. They work. A lot of bad guys work with sort of pragmatic arguments. It's good because it works.
Is
And
it
this
for now? Yeah, exactly. You said
Yeah.
for now. It's not like the ultimate nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
It's just something that we understand that we can rely upon, and we can try to push further through our technology.
Yeah, but there are certain absolute facts of the universe. Otherwise, we
Exactly.
wouldn't even be able to say the sentence. There are certain absolute facts in the universe.
I agree. Okay.
Absolutes are required in order to have anything. There are
I
certain
agree.
absolutes
I
in the
agree
universe.
with you. I agree with everything you're saying, except for the word evolution just doesn't make sense to me, and here's why. I think we need to update a lot of the things. You see what I'm saying? We need to update a lot of the words that we're using, and here's why. A lot of Christians, a lot of atheists, a lot of agnostics, a lot of people argue about this stuff, and I said, let's get down to the source and the meat and the potatoes of the argument, and stop using this broad umbrella. You know what I'm talking?
I
You know what
agree
I'm
that the
saying?
word evolution is used too broadly. Yeah, the word evolution
Exactly.
is, but it's not by scientists aren't doing that. Creationists tend to use the word too broadly because they use the word like evolution to describe things like the Big Bang.
So
It's got
do
nothing to do.
evolutionists, though.
No, evolution doesn't deal with the Big
No,
Bang. It
I'm
doesn't
not. I'm
deal with
not
the Big
talking.
Bang.
I'm not talking about all evolution.
No,
I'm
but
talking about, yeah.
the term there's two. The problem is here is that the term is used too broadly by creationists, and also that it's also there are two different definitions of it. There's the biological natural selection, genetic evolution, and then there's
gotta
evolution as in gradual change.
You
So
got to hear
that's
what
not a
they're saying.
mechanism.
You have to hear what they're saying. They say, "Oh my God," the things that you would hear. It would bleed your ears. You'd be like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, who?" Like, or you would be like, even like a non-believer or somebody like an atheist or whatever, misinterpreting evolution.
Well, the
You see
problem
what I'm
is
saying?
yes, because people think because evolution could mean just gradual change. And so people use it in a very loose way. That's not entirely inaccurate, but it's not the same thing as the specific scientific theory.
You got to
But
see it
the
on both
main
sides. You got to see it on both sides. Is what I'm saying.
well, I see it on the rational side.
Right.
If the other side is wrong, I'm not going to see it from that side. But the point is that one of the problems is that people think evolution means metamorphosis. That's the thing that really
Thank you
bugs me.
for reasoning with me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, bro.
But
I mean,
people
I'm so grateful just to even talk to you. Man, oh my God, if they would just get this kind of shit. If they would get,
they don't want to. People do what they want, and if they don't want to have a conversation, if they want to just
like I'm almost crying and begging God to tell everybody about our conversation that we're having.
Well, it is being recorded.
I understand that, but that's different in
Yeah.
my
Well,
belief than yours.
yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I mean, the best we can do is just propagate our ideas as widely as possible.
I almost want to just fucking stop talking.
Yeah. Well, I've got to soon because it's 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh my God.
I'm at a
Well,
bit of a disadvantage compared to other
what
people
the
because
fuck is going on? Why the fuck is everybody like this? I
because
don't.
because people are raised with bad ideas, but in order to compensate for the fact that those ideas can't be explained rationally, they develop an emotional, cultural attachment. You don't see people like desperately insecure about mathematics because people aren't
I'm a hypocrite
brainwashed
because I
into
just
mathematics.
explain it rational. I mean, like whether I was irrational, I'm getting emotional because of what you see. What I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, that's no problem. Reason and emotions are not in conflict. The problem is that people do it backwards. Instead of trying to find out what the facts are, starting with a blank slate and then trying to use reason to find the facts, they are brought up with certain ideas that are really bad. And then when they come across people that disagree, they can't argue for their position rationally because
You
they
just
won't argue
explained the
into
Bible.
it.
You just mentioned a biblical scripture where you become a blank slate. By the way,
Yeah, yeah.
So, thank
Yeah,
you.
well, yeah, well, this is the problem. People, because they have the conclusion first, they're raised with the conclusion, not the reasons for the conclusion, because they're often very bad reasons.
I
They
was
can't.
not. By the way, I was not raised a Christian. I was an atheist until about 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's more intellectually defensible than just being raised that way. It's the same thing with being raised an atheist. If you're raised an atheist but you don't know why you're an atheist, if you can't defend it, then you're going to be emotionally insecure about it, just as much as a Christian is, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist, or whatever.
No, I'm
Everybody's
sorry.
emotionally. Everybody, no
My
matter what they
family.
believe,
Yeah,
everybody, no matter what they believe.
I wasn't raised an atheist. I'm saying that
Yeah,
I was risen. How do you say it? I was. My parents let me choose what I wanted to do until about 5 years ago. They didn't have anything to do with it. I felt
yeah,
something personally that changed my life forever, and
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
people call it the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, well, that's why
Oh,
that's why I distinguished you from people who are just raised to be Christian. The
uh,
point is, most people don't go through a transition, an intellectual transition of any kind. Most people have a position they do because of their culture. I mean, a lot of socialists and Marxists, they had socialist and Marxist parents.
you
They
said
listen to
blank
socialists.
slate. As soon as you said blank slate,
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
the nail in the coffin right there.
yeah. Well, the
Blank
point.
slate.
Yeah, we should start off intellectually as blank slates and then build ourselves up. We should be self-made mentally. But when most people aren't, most people before they can really think things through already take loads of things for granted. And when you don't have reasons for your positions, when you come across people that disagree, you can't reason with them, and so you
Oh
just
my
attack,
God, man,
attack, attack.
this is my problem. It's like almost like I have to take my blank slate and throw it down to smash it on the ground and
Yeah,
restart again. You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
Because nobody's getting it. Nobody under. Am
Well,
I alone?
you have to
Am
do
I
that. You have to,
alone?
yeah, you have to break your own ideas down. This is
It's
the
called
Socratic.
popping the Christian bubble, by the way.
Yeah,
If you've
yeah.
ever
Well,
heard of that.
it's actually called the Socratic method. This is hundreds of years older than Christianity. You have to basically use question. You have to people have to a philosopher would ask questions, in order to get people to then think harder about their own ideas. And it's you sort of question them into a state of objectivity. So this is the
I'm sorry for getting all emotional, man.
yeah. That's okay.
I can't. I'm
You
baffled.
hear me when I get emotional. Whew.
I'm baffled, man. I'm baffled. Why you and me are the first person I've ever talked to on Google Plus that understands. You are
Yeah.
literally that's it.
Well,
There's no other.
Mr. Cropper is somewhat like that as well. He's a bit more hostile to Christianity than I am. Because I used to be hostile to Christianity, and then I studied Islam, and now I'm not. Because I have a sense of
Oh,
perspective.
I
You
have
know?
my own freaking reasons
Yeah.
for believing in Jesus Christ, and
Yeah.
nobody can take that away from me. And I don't. They're like, oh no, you're wrong. And blah blah blah. I'm not here to argue.
I honestly don't care.
I'm not here to debate why I believe
Yeah,
personally.
I don't. Yeah, Christianity is not an issue that I care about. It's not an. It's I care about things. No. It's
not a religious thing. It's more like, you see what I'm saying? It's not about religion. Jesus Christ didn't even believe in religion.
That's
A
true.
religion. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand completely. Well, I actually started, if you saw the beginning of the Hangout, I actually started by explaining a lot of things about Christianity and how it developed in its early history. Because I am a biblical scholar and I've studied Christianity for 20 years. But the thing is, I used to have a negative opinion of it because I had no sense of contrast. I couldn't compare it to anything else because I was too busy focused on just studying Christianity. Then I started studying. I started studying. No, it's not. Then I started studying Islam, and because of that, I can see things in Christianity that I couldn't see before. Huge amounts of Christianity was open to me because I didn't see it because I didn't see.
You're like Luke.
Have an alternative.
You're like Luke. You're like Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, I see the Force now.
Or you're like Paul. You're like Paul. Exactly. Who used to be called something.
You need contrast. You need light to have darkness. You need darkness to have light. You need an example of evil before you can see good.
Yep.
And that's the point. I couldn't see the good things about Christianity because I didn't have an example of a religion which is absolutely evil.
Don't get me wrong. I don't understand it all either. For me to sit here and explain it to you guys would be irrelevant to the conversation.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I'm not here to challenge Christianity or anything. I mean, that's I put that down a long time ago.
It's a personal thing. It has nothing.
Yeah, but it's also an issue of like rights and priorities. I challenge worldviews which directly threaten my freedoms. Yes. Those are on the table because that's self-defense, that's self-interest. But if a worldview isn't threatening to take away my rights and freedoms, I don't care.
Thank God for you. Thank God.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Christians that are threatening to take away my gun rights. It's
God
liberals.
bless you and your family. I don't care if you believe in God or not, but I mean, man, I'll pray for you and cry for you. Oh my God.
Well, as long as you're enjoying yourself, that's important.
No, I am definitely. It doesn't matter about me. If there is a God, I would hope that you are on His list. Because I don't even know if I am.
Well, let me put it this way. If there is a God, I am perfectly happy to give a good account of myself. I'm perfectly happy to explain and justify myself.
Exactly. And I would hope that you were given that chance.
Yeah, I'm not just gonna stand there and flip St. Paul the Bird.
Exactly.
It's actually Peter, isn't it? The Gates, isn't it? No, but
Peter chopped off somebody's ear.
Yeah, that's true. But it doesn't count because Jesus grew it back. So,
it does count.
We've all done that. We've all chopped off somebody's ear.
That's true. Van Gogh chopped off his own.
Thank you, Adam. But
he didn't grow back. I see you were being metaphorical.
You're talking about. He's talking about Picasso. Picasso cut off his own ear. Everybody knows.
Van Gogh. But
was it Go? I'm sorry, Go. Sorry.
Gogh. But the problem is that you have to prioritize in your life, and you have to prioritize worldviews. And to me, arguing about a worldview that isn't harming you is pointless. And there are some ways in which some Christians are harming other people, but I mean that's certain individuals that are doing
flat earthers.
Yeah. The question is, I'm thinking Landover Baptist Church, that sort of thing. And you can argue against them, but to argue against all Christianity is just a waste of time. There are very few.
I've been to many Baptist churches that have welcomed me in. They said, "Please come in." They grabbed me by my shoulders and forced me in.
Yeah. Well,
not all Baptists are bad.
No, I'm talking about the Landover Baptist Church.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. I know the difference. But the issue is whether or not the worldview as a whole is directly, actively against my rights and my liberties. If that's the case, then there's nothing wrong with dedicating your life to trying to destroy the worldview. But you have to have a really, really good case that the whole thing is intrinsically against your freedoms.
I have no argument against atheism.
Well, I'm not out to take away your freedom to be Christian. I believe 100% in religious liberty. But the problem is that other people don't,
Oh
and
my
those are the people we
God.
need to
See,
focus on and
this is where
challenge.
me and you are going to disagree.
Yeah.
Liberty, what does that mean?
Basically, it means the freedom to choose.
By
Uh,
law from society.
well, no, it choose your own life, to be free to make your own decisions in life and your own
From
path in life,
society by
providing
law. But
no,
who's the lawmaker?
well, human beings make laws, but we don't
Who
make
is the
rights.
society that you're explaining right now?
Well, right now, mine or yours. But obviously, any society in general, laws are made by human beings, but rights aren't made by human beings. The point is,
That isn't the way it works. Go ahead.
yeah, well, rights are derived from the nature of mankind. They're logically extrapolated from the way human beings are.
This is why they make money off of us. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that when I'm dealing with a worldview that's directly against my rights, I have to challenge it. Otherwise, I'd be betraying myself. Whereas if I'm attacking a worldview that isn't out to destroy my rights, I'm wasting my time. And so to me,
I agree.
it's an important priority. And this is where Mr. Cropper and I disagree. He attacks Christianity, and I just don't see the point. I just think it's a waste of time. Prioritize the worldviews that are directly against you, that are in immediate danger. And
Let me explain to you this really quick. There's a guy on Google Plus called Joe Carter. Joe Carter. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
If you haven't, subscribe to him now. His motto is a mutual stake in each other's success is a recipe for a better world. Let me say that again.
A mutual stake in each other's success is a recipe for a better
and each other's success is a recipe for a better world.
Yeah.
That means it doesn't matter what you believe. I don't care if you're an atheist. Do you think a fireman cares if you're an atheist or a Christian?
I certainly hope not.
Right. That is the attitude that we should all carry.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Neo, didn't you just confront Edward on what liberty means as an abstraction? So if we can't define terms, how are we supposed to act with each other?
Yes, I mean this is why the term liberty was very carefully defined by the founding fathers, because they wanted everybody to be on the same page. You kind of have to agree on some basic things, otherwise you can't coexist. So we can have differences, lots of differences, but at the same time we have to have a minimal foundation of fundamental principles. Because I'm not going to live next to a paedophile that believes it's okay to molest his children. There's no coexistence there. I'm not going to leave him to his beliefs. I'm going to call the police, or I'm going to shoot him. That's how it works. There are certain fundamentals we have to agree upon when it comes to humanity, humane treatment, rule of law, civil order, that kind of stuff. So, but once you've got over those fundamentals, then yeah, there's huge room for disagreement. But only because we agree on the fundamentals. So this idea of that you could have total disagreement on everything, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to have some fundamentals of agreement. That's rule of law, yeah. Adam Turner says a paedophile doesn't believe in liberty. Well, they don't believe in rights, at least not for children. That's kind of the point.
These people, am I blind? Are you blind?
Not
I mean, this is the term. I mean, who's really leading each other off of the cliff biblically? Is a blind man holding my hand, pulling me off of the edge of a cliff.
Every world leader is blind.
You see, of course, Hillary Clinton. Somebody said F Donald Trump, and I said F Hillary and her husband.
That's the right response, yeah. I mean, I F both of them just to be sure,
Well, if you want Donald Trump anywhere, he belongs in the Treasury, where he's Yeah,
well, yeah.
He'll pour all of his money into it. Exactly.
Well, this is the thing. I think he'd be good at some things as president and bad at others. This is why I wouldn't want him as president, because he'd have too many different roles, and he's not really good at everything. You need someone who's a good all-rounder.
He's not good at foreign relations. We know that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel that it's better to be rude than to surrender all the time.
No, you're correct.
Yeah,
Foreign relations need to be shut down. Like, we need to stop cooperating with countries that tax
or
us to
evil.
death.
Yeah,
Every time, okay, every time we make a transaction with China, do you realize there's like this 75% tax on that? Like, I don't know what the number is, but it's pretty insane. Like,
well, I mean,
every
I don't. The problem with trading in countries like China is not just the trade deals on our side; it's the fact
we
that
owe them so much.
well,
Like, you
yeah, it's
might as
also the
well,
fact
yeah,
that they're an evil dictatorship, and
right,
so we're propping up it. See, I believe in total economic sanctions for all evil governments. I
exactly.
believe all evil societies should be completely isolated. This is what they did to the Soviet Union. We economically isolated them,
We
and
used
they
to be
collapsed.
that way in
Yeah,
America.
because you had Ronald Reagan, who
Yeah.
was very, very
We
clever.
used to be that way anti-communist. There was no trade. In fact, we
Yeah,
were the technological center of the world.
yeah.
We were
You
the
don't. Yeah, because
people
all
that
you.
invented. Yeah.
Yeah, every single time you trade with an evil country, you are putting Adolf Hitler on life support. It's as simple as that. That's basically how it works. And we trade with
So
Saudi
why
Arabia.
why doesn't Britain do something about this? I can't
We
understand
we
why Great
we
Britain.
we lost our empire and our money fighting the Nazis.
I don't
And
care. Britain is great.
yeah, it is.
Great Britain.
But we're
It
very
is.
small and we're very weak now because
I
this
don't care.
the
I don't
First and
care.
Second World War destroyed
I don't
our
care. Britons
prosperity.
are stronger than
Yeah.
Americans.
Well,
Britain.
yeah, that's true. We did tell the EU to
They
go screw themselves.
are way stronger than America. Great Britain can actually create Nazi technology tomorrow and then frickin' use it to their. Oh my god. If Britain were America,
Yeah, it
yeah.
is. Well, America is just a larger, richer, bigger, more
I
powerful
would
Britain.
rather give our money back to the Queen.
Well, she is kind of awesome. No, no, I mean, at the end of the day, America needs to be a bit more like Britain in one or two areas.
America needs to submit
No, no.
and
Well,
say,
I wouldn't say no to a British Empire, but I want to see sort of a new kind of cooperative alliance
oh no,
between good
there's
societies.
many video games out there where actually this happens,
Yeah,
right? So the Terrans of America, like
yeah,
the military guys, the grunts on the fields, the
yeah,
guys smoking cigars, the American guys that are die-hard Americans, right?
yeah,
Winston Churchill comes back to life out of his grave
yeah.
and defeat the Nazis. That's where we're going.
Well, we did. We defeated the Nazis. The new
Exactly.
Nazis is the EU, the European Union, and we defeated
Yep.
them again
Yep.
because they're a bunch of evil fascists.
This
And
is what we're dealing with.
but the
That's what
problem is
we're.
that a lot of people don't see that. A lot of people don't know evil when it's staring them in the face. They don't understand that the EU is evil because it violates the individual rights
Yep.
of the people. Every
It's
time,
central banking
yeah,
system.
well, yeah, because you've also got like when Ireland or Holland wanted a referendum on the EU constitution, the EU
Yep.
basically overruled the rights of the people to have a referendum. That's evil. That's fascism. And you support the EU, you're a traitor to Britain. So that's just how it works. And they don't understand that because they have no moral principles. They just see the EU as like international and multinational. We should move beyond nations, But that's what the Nazis wanted. That's what the Soviets wanted. They wanted a one world government with their ideology in
The
charge.
Nazis wanted to open a portal to hell.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, well, if you watch Hellboy, yeah. But the problem is that there's no difference between liberal globalization and Nazism or Soviet Union. I mean, it's internationalism, and it doesn't matter whether you dissolve the borders through surrendering to some evil nonsense like the EU,
So
or dissolve the borders by
is
conquering.
communism socialism?
Well, not Edward.
Yeah,
I think you're right in what you say there. I think in terms of Nazi socialism, of course, that was for the nation or the
I
volk.
thought, yeah,
But
exactly. I thought the Nazis
no,
came
but
up
he's
with the
right.
Socialist Nazi Party
No,
before Stalin.
but Edward's right on the sense of the EU, that something like the EU wants to extrapolate that on a global scale, which is even worse. in
The
my opinion.
Nazis invented socialism.
No. Socialism was before even Karl Marx. The Nazis invented National Socialism. They invented Mussolini and Hitler. They both sort of half invented each fascism. Fascism is a hybrid of socialism with capitalism, specifically designed so that it can self-perpetuate. Because at the time, even at the time, Mussolini and Hitler could already see that socialist systems were doomed to collapse. And so they decided that they were going to create a new system where they would use capitalism as a slave to the governmental policies of socialism. So instead of economic and political socialism, you have economic capitalism, but political socialism. So it's a hybrid of the two. And so because socialism, economic socialism, is going to collapse very quickly, whereas capitalism can perpetuate indefinitely. And so you have the indefinite economics of capitalism, but with the evil tyranny of socialism, and that was the combination, and that's what Europe is today. Mixed economy, big government, heavy regulation, crony capitalism is exactly what Mussolini did, exactly what Nazis did, because they wanted a version of socialism that was pro-big business, and so they got into bed with the big businesses so they control the regulation, they control the big businesses' regulations, and the big businesses got into bed with the politicians through crony capitalism. So it's a two-way corruption, a sort of spill out between what should ordinarily be separate. The state and the economy should ordinarily be separate. The moment you merge the two, you create huge corruption and huge problems. And so fascism is the norm. Every single Western country right now is technically a fascist country in the sense that they are a hybrid of governmental socialism with economic capitalism. And that's why all these governments are so corrupt, and that's why the economy is always having terrible problems. That's also why the education system's screwed up as well. So unfortunately, Mussolini and Hitler had the last laugh.
Well,
and the EU just reinforces that.
I wouldn't advocate either or. I mean, I stand on the side of capitalism fully, but I would say that, and this is actually Hitler's argument, that National Socialism, at least they hold their sovereignty instead of like a collective EU.
Yes, but
that's why they lost against the Soviet Union.
They didn't just.
The Nazis were so stupid. They charged. Yeah, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, no, they lost against other nationalist ideologies, though, because Britain was nationalist, America was nationalist, and we kicked the National Socialists, us. The good nationalists defeated the bad nationalists, as well as the bad internationalists. Not that there's any such thing as a good internationalist, but the point is that the nationals, first you had socialism, then you had Marxism. Marx came along and he joined the socialist movements, and he created his own version of socialism, which was even more toxic and evil than the previous versions. But then the other socialists didn't like what Marx was doing, so they created an anti-Marxist socialism, and that's what Hitler and Mussolini were doing. They were particularly because the Marxists went from Mensheviks to Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks won against the Mensheviks, and the Bolsheviks were even more insane than the Mensheviks. So you got socialism just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse in one way, and so the Mussolini and Hitler took socialism, and they made it worse and worse and worse in a different way. So you ended up with sort of a branching, increased degradation. I mean, it was a bizarre thing. The 20th century was a mess.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to take it even further, like I just wrote here, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree, but Hitler repeatedly said he was fighting the internationalists who he thought was the Bolshevik takeover. So, you know, the banking industry, all that sort of stuff.
There's actually a video on this on YouTube about the whole Red Army and how they started. Remember, the Bolsheviks were overtaken by the white. What were they called?
First there were the White Russians, and then there were the Red Russians. And the Red Russians were the Bolsheviks, and they defeated the White Russians. But they were both
called
evil.
the White Army or something like that.
Yes,
the White.
Yeah. There was the White versus the Red. In the same way that in China it was the nationalists versus the communists. And in both cases, the even worse side won. Because sometimes the bad guys win, unfortunately. But the problem with Hitler was that he was a national socialist. So, yeah, he may not have approved of international socialism. He had no problem with national socialism, hence the party name. And so, from the point of view of the individual and living in Germany, what's the difference between being in a socialist hell that's national, that has its national sovereignty, and being a socialist hell that's international? There's no difference for the individual whatsoever.
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, we agree on that scale, but for
Yeah,
the
I
German
agree
people,
as
it was
well.
for the stuff that happened to them after World War One. I mean, it was easy to rile them together. It was very
And the
simple.
First World, well, the Germany was in the wrong in the First World War as well, because there were three main forces in the First World War that started the First World War. There was the military nationalists in Germany, the military nationalists in Austria-Hungary, and the military nationalists in Turkey. There were specific military leaders that really wanted war, really pushed for it, and those three leaders in particular, I can't remember their names, were responsible, and so it was nationalism that caused the problem in the first place, but it was internationalism that caused the problem in the second place.
That's the
So you had a
recipe.
constant, you had sort of bad nationalism versus bad internationalism, because in both cases the nationalists were socialists. I mean, Germany was a socialist country even before Hitler, because the Weimar Republic created the world's first welfare state.
Yep.
And that created a sense of entitlement and dependency on the government, which made it easier for people to buy the idea of Nazism, because people were already getting free stuff from the states. It
Why
wasn't
the
what
fuck
difference
are
is it?
you an atheist? I still am wrapping my mind.
Well, I mean, is it because you're used to atheists being more left-leaning?
Yes.
Yes,
Like,
I
oh
agree.
my
I agree. That
God.
is a tragedy. It breaks my heart to see atheists swallow the same garbage as socialism,
Same
Marxism,
shit.
communism.
The
Yeah,
same
and
shit.
to me, socialism and Marxism and communism are evil religions. So I keep saying to them,
You don't
why are you?
understand. I'm born of Germany.
Yeah,
My grandfather served in Germany, and so did my dad. So, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
As I say, it's all about the collectivist mindset. The moment you
But
start
oh my God.
arguing against the rights of the individual, and the moment you say that the individual must sacrifice for the group, that's when anything goes. That's when you've got mob rule or you've got dictatorships. They all spring from the same question:
Thank you,
what is the rights
Brandon.
of the individual relative to the group?
Thank you, Brandon, for introducing me to freaking Edward.
Yeah,
Adding him
yeah.
now.
Unfortunately, he's gone to
Holy,
bed, and
holy shit.
I should have gone to bed too.
Well, no,
Well,
I'm looking up your profile
Yeah,
now.
well, I don't have much of a profile because I only started using my Google account for these Hangouts. So
Well,
that's
I'm
it.
gonna add you under family.
well,
Okay.
under family. Well, Edward, let me get back to the context here. There's
Go
no
ahead.
doubt
Sorry.
in what Rand said in one of her not to be a Rand freak here, but
I
I'm an
don't know.
objectivist. But what she said in Phil Donahue's interview, where she was correct in saying the Nazis were way more explicit than even the Soviets in their altruistic sensibilities. I mean, that was what
Yeah.
they just drove home for sure.
Yeah, because the problem is that most people don't use the term altruist the way we do, and that causes a lot of confusion because people think altruism means the same thing as
Oh, but they
benevolence
did.
or compassion.
They did for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they meant altruist in the Auguste Comte sense of it is intrinsically moral to sacrifice. It is not just even if it doesn't result in good, if you intend to sacrifice yourself, that is intrinsically good. Even if it's not good in any other sense, it's intrinsic. And when you make sacrifice intrinsic good, when you make self-immolation intrinsic good, then you can brainwash people into going along with the most evil, destructive ideologies that are just not just destructive to Jews, not just destructive to France, but even destructive to the German people. The German people were destroyed by the Nazis. And they sat
How
there.
does an Austrian guy take over an entire nation of Germans?
Well, because his argument was that Austria was really part of Germany because Germany should include all German-speaking territories,
my
including
God.
Czechoslovakia and Poland. And
Yeah, it's
so,
shrouded in nationalism completely.
yeah,
That's what we're talking about.
Well,
He's not German. He's not German.
but it wasn't nationalism, it was languagism. That was the justification. His justification for going into Czechoslovakia is that the people in the western corner were large German speakers, and the same thing with Poland. There was a proportion of Polish population in the
Neil,
And
this
Himmler,
is
and also
this is
Himmler.
also a common thing for language to be a grouping. You know, for wars gone by, that we have a common kinship where, in the sense, it's also means genetic relation, all that sort of stuff. So it's very easy to.
Hey,
use that.
Adam, you, me, Brandon and Edward and the other guy who's here, we should get together and bomb another country because we agree in the same ideology.
We should.
That you know, see that sounds. It doesn't sound crazy.
No, no. Well, you see, the problem with bombing is that it's violence, and violence is disturbing because it's initiating force. I don't believe violence isn't intrinsically wrong. Initiation of force is intrinsically wrong. And so, if someone bombs you, you have the right to bomb them back. But it has to, has to be self-defense.
So what Himmler, you remember Himmler? You
Yeah.
teach it, yeah.
Yeah.
I studied German history.
Yeah.
Like
I
mean, up to the teeth with it because I am German in blood, and all. Like I can't stand when these freaking Nazis. It's almost KKK, Albert Pike. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
Yeah.
that
Well,
kind of.
it's collectivism because it's language collectivism, racial collectivism, national collectivism. When you emphasize the group over the individual, anything goes. Because this actually began with the French Revolution. You see, the turning point was in 1776. You had two revolutions in 1776 and onwards. You had the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The American Revolution was the good revolution because it was based on individualism and individual rights. The French Revolution was a disaster because it was based on collectivism. It was the poor versus the rich. It was the uneducated versus the educated. It was one group versus another. It wasn't one group versus another when it came to
Sounds like
American
politics.
Because the American Revolution wasn't America versus Britain. It was individuals versus collectivists. It was freedom lovers versus authoritarians. Because there were people in America that supported Britain. A lot of people in America supported Britain, and there were British people who supported America. I would have been on America's side during the American Revolution.
That's the Civil War. You just explained the Civil War.
It was not America versus Britain. It was individualism versus authoritarianism and collectivism.
This is also an internal problem, Civil War. It was it eventually turned into a,
But it was nowhere near as bad as what happened in France. In France, everybody turned on everybody else, and it was an endless bloodbath until Napoleon took it over. So you either end up with collectivism, you either end up with mob rule and chaos, or you end up with a single dictator taking everything over because you got everybody in the mob. So it's easy
exactly. Do you think the Civil War was fought over slavery? It was fought over money.
Well, it was fought over slavery and money. It was fought over loads of different things. But
But you see, what I'm saying is, okay, I used to live in the South.
Yeah.
I traced back to my family lineage. I've studied my ancestry, and none of my family used to own slaves in the South.
So most people didn't own slaves. Slavery was extremely inefficient.
You know who owned the slaves? The guys up north that owned the banks. That controlled plantations.
Indirectly. But the point is that there were still a lot of people in the South who didn't see what was wrong with slavery.
That wasn't 100% of the case.
No. But there were a lot of people that didn't see anything wrong with it, and it's to their eternal shame.
Right, but you gotta understand. There's people in my family. You gotta understand. People like my family, if they didn't exist, the Underground Railroad would have not existed.
No, but I mean, wars aren't started over money because wars are actually the best way to waste money. People who want money are for peace. So I wouldn't say money because money. Do you know how much money is wasted in wars?
Well, I mean, there was no money into moving slaves out of the country to up north.
There's no money in slavery, period. Slavery is a welfare state. It's a communist system. It's where you have a load of people who are not rewarded.
What if you're like Neo and you break the system and you say, okay, I'm going to hire slaves, but you don't ever tell the government. You remember Stalin used to put impossible numbers on people that would end them up in the gulag.
Yeah.
You remember
all tyrannies make too many laws for anybody to be able to follow, so that you can.
Well, what they would do is they would say this is actually after Stalin. Well, I mean before, you know what I'm saying. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that it's actually before, but they used to do this stuff even after that in the 1960s. But You see what I'm saying? Is
Well, they
that
still do that in America today. Every government wants to have impossible rules for the population, so that
it's impossible standards. Like
yeah.
you go to a job, you go to college, you spend 30K or 40K on a college degree that you'll never pay off.
Mhm.
You're enslaved to the system with your social security number. It's almost the same thing. Your social security number is worse than what the gulag was.
Well, no. I mean, it's the issue. The issue is the rules. The point is that if you make so many laws and you make them so ridiculous, you make everyone a criminal. Technically
But
speaking,
it's a
every
slow
American
death.
citizen, every
It's a
American
slow.
citizen.
It's a
Yeah,
slow, painful death. It's not an instant death.
well, it's no. The issue is if you make everybody a criminal, that means the government can, within the law, arrest anybody they
Arrest
want at any time.
anybody. Yeah.
Every American citizen breaks at least 3 laws unknowingly every day,
I
according
do
to
it
this.
all. I do it all the time. I break. Maybe I run a red light, or
No. I'm talking
yeah.
about like really, really small petty laws that most people don't even know exist.
That's what I'm talking about.
Really, yeah.
Running a
Well,
red light, or
red light is a bit.
jaywalking, or I mean, they will in my city doing these kinds of things are appallable.
Yeah, remind me not to
Like
drive with you.
you have to be a model citizen. If
Well,
you run a
no. They don't want you to be a model citizen. They want you to be a criminal.
By
So
the way, I want to update you. There is a camera on every street light in America that I know of right now.
oh, there are certainly in my country. My country is massive CCTV everywhere. It's way
Yep.
more than America. Way more.
So, by the way, my wife got a ticket for running a red light through her email.
Well, is this
This,
official?
this is Minority Report. You
Yeah.
ever seen? Yeah.
Yeah. Not a very good plot, but there you go. No, the problem with this thing is that governments don't want people to be good because you can't control good people. You can only control bad people, or at least you only can legally control people that are criminals. And so they want everybody to be
Do
criminals.
you know
and they
what the
control them.
milliseconds were? 0.88 seconds. 0.88 seconds.
That's not bad.
She ran the red light at. That is unreasonable. If a cop in real life was to see that, they'd be like, let her go. A computer sees that and says, she ran the red light. See the difference?
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah, because that's why computers shouldn't be running the country. But when you create a bloated super government bureaucracy, that means you're going to have a computer running it sooner or later because there aren't enough people. There aren't enough people to keep enough eyes on the population. There aren't enough people looking at monitors. You've got all these cameras. Most of the cameras that you see, people aren't looking through them because there literally aren't enough people in the world to actually look through that many cameras.
We're at Judge Dredd. We're at Judge Dredd.
Well, Neo.
You ever see that movie,
Jesus
Judge
did
Dredd?
say,
No?
Yeah.
Jesus did say, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's.
Yeah, pay your taxes.
Oh no, I do
That's
that.
because
I
the
do that
government
every
uses
day.
money.
I submit to the law, no matter how ridiculous it is. You know what I'm like,
Yeah, but
okay, cool. You guys are ridiculous, but I'm gonna go ahead,
Yeah, no, it's not about intentions. It has nothing to do with intentions. They want you to break laws without knowing it. That's the point. They want you without, and they don't want to tell you that you've broken the law. They just want to have it on file that they have in case that comes in handy. So that if they do anything, if they want to do something to you,
it's really funny. I ended up in jail for that same reason. Everybody there was my homeboys. Every single person that was in jail with me would fight for me and say, nobody fuck with Neo.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? Like, they were all like, if you fuck with Neo, we're gonna fuck you up. Like, one dude tried me and my homeboy butted his head into the glass and was like, keep fucking with him. Watch what happens to you.
Anyway, I'm gonna have to leave you now because it's nearly 7 in the morning. So I've got to
Okay, sorry.
You talk amongst yourselves, and eventually the whole thing will wind down, or just leave right now. So
No, you're good. Yeah, you're good, man. I appreciate you. God bless you, whatever that means to you. God bless you and your family, or you can think for me and I'll think for you. All that kind of mantra. Yeah.
Okay, I'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you. I don't want to argue or debate with people. I can't stand debating. Debation is masturbation of the mind. It's like, are you stroking your ego? That guy was perfect at not doing that. How much ego do you want? I don't have an ego. Literally, all I do is sit here and try to reason with people, and people are like, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. It's like, I gave an opinion. We're having a conversation, so shifting goalposts and having a debate doesn't exist in a conversation. If there's a difference between a conversation and a debate. No? I hear somebody click clacking. Who's it? Brandon. But he has died tonight in his own hangout. Shit. Shit. Brandon. Sorry I killed your hangout again. With logic and reason. Excuse me for being polite. I try to give everybody a reasonable doubt or a chance to explain what they're talking about. I do tech support all day. I say yes sir, no sir. And I love you, God bless. Good night.